Baron Giles. Welcome back to Tech Talk with Daniel.
Thanks for having me back again.
How are you?
I'm good. It's been an interesting holiday season, but all that's passed now and kind of settled back down into routine, which I always like. And the kids back to school, and I can have my days free without distractions to move forward on my various projects.
Anyway, I want us to start off our third conversation with a few words of thanks. So first of all, today is January 6th, and earlier this week on January 1st, I celebrated the 1-year anniversary of the premiere of my first Tech Talk with Daniel conversation, which was with you.
Oh, congratulations.
And the day before, I premiered my 26th conversation of 2023, which means that on average, a new conversation premiered every 2 weeks. So I wanted to thank you for being my first guest and for actually taking a chance on me.
I remember you when you approached me the first time. It was kind of out of the blue, and I didn't know really who you were at the time. And and you said you were starting some kind of new technical talk. So I had no idea it would blossom into the extensive interviews you've done with so many great luminaries of the field. I feel honored actually that you include me amongst them, because a lot of those guys are people I looked up to coming up as a game developer and as a programmer. So it's been great to see all that unfold. And I even watched most of them. And
I remember, wow, I'm honored. And I remember we talked like at the beginning of September 2022, when I told you that I saw the first version of DREAMM and I really liked it and I wanted to talk about it. And the only things I could send you as reference for my interviews were interviews that I've done with Paul at the time, when we both interviewed someone. I think it was Graham Devine. I think I sent you the Graham Devine interview. But again, thank you for taking a chance on me with solo interviewing. So thanks for that. And the second thing I want to thank you for is the fact that in our previous DREAMM demo, which was recorded in April 2023, I asked you to add support for one of my favorite Indiana Jones action games, which is Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine. And lo and behold, a few months later, you did. So thanks for that. And I even live streamed, I think it was 3 hours or 4 hours of the Infernal Machine. It ran perfectly on DREAMM. So
it's a lot easier to get running on DREAMM than it is try to get it running on a native machine these days. It's quite the challenge. Which is why we have to start convincing GOG and Steam to start using DREAMM. I mean, I presume that convincing them to stop using ScumVM for the classic adventure games may be problematic, because it works and they don't care. They don't update ScumVM even. Usually you get version 2 when version 2.7 is already out. So, but maybe with this one, maybe if enough people leave bad reviews on Infernal Machine, it will actually happen. So. Yeah, the games, the Windows games, especially of that era, are particularly tricky. And of course, Mac users can't run them at all. So when you go to GOG, good old games for the Mac, you can buy them, but you can't run them. The only thing you can download is like an install package for it, like an offline install package, and then you don't really know how to crack it. I've actually been looking into, I don't know if it'll ever happen, but there are tools out there that can let you extract the files there, and once you have the files on your Mac, then you can run them in DREAMM, and that's a good thing. So it'd be nice if DREAMM could actually crack those and packages and understand what the files are and be able to import the files directly, so it'd be easier for Mac users, but that's not something that's super high priority, but it's something I'd sort of like to see happen eventually.
The good thing about the Windows games is that they come with executable files, so it's easier for DREAMM to recognize them, unlike the ScumVM, the Scum games, which usually come without the executable, because ScumVM can handle them without the executable, so that may be problematic.
Yeah, it's kind of weird how inconsistent they are about it, too. Some games will include it in like a subfolder for no reason that I can perceive, and some games they didn't. I don't know why they were so inconsistent about it. I would have expected them either to release them all with no executable or release them all with the executable, but it's just kind of random. And it's random, it's different between Windows and Mac even. So if you're on a Windows machine and you're on the Windows version, it includes some of those versions will have the executable, but the same version that if you download it on the Mac won't, and vice versa. And so it's kind of confusing. And so I'd have to make a matrix to figure out which ones were actually, directly runnable for Dream out of that. I really wish they'd just change those all back to include the executable just in case you wanted to run it with Dream. That'd be great for me, but it's kind of hard to get things to change once they're already working.
My guess is that games that come with the executables are usually games that had a previous release with DOSBox on that platform. So, for example, if GOG released it on DOSBox, then they had to have the executable. But some of them, they were released directly with ScumVM, so they didn't. So that's that. I think that's my theory. Okay, enough chit chat. Let's dream. In our previous Dream demo, we showcased the Secret of Monkey Island, Loom Hebrew Edition, Zach McCracken, FM Towns, Escape from Monkey Island, Dark Forces, Monkey Island 2, Ultimate Talkie Edition, Rebel Assault 2, and Passport to Adventure and Afterlife.
Right.
And today we're going to cover newly supported games that were recently added to the latest alpha version, newly supported games that were added to the stable version since our last conversation in April 2023, and maybe a few games that have been around since the first version that we haven't covered yet. So we'll see if we have enough time for that.
It's probably good to set the context here in terms of which versions have been out since our last conversation, because when our last conversation
this is exactly what I want to ask you. Give us a rundown of the updates and features added to Dream in the past 8 months.
Yeah, so it's hard to believe that it was that long ago that we conversed, but certainly, obviously new games get added, and that's one of the major selling features. But I would say that in 2.0, which you were running in April, was my first version to support the Mac, and so we had Mac OS folks in the fold. And 2.1, which I released in September, I believe, included support for Linux. So now we actually you can run Dream on your Windows machine, your Mac, or your Linux box, and whether you have an Intel processor or an ARM processor, as long as it's 64 bits on all three platforms, it'll work. And so there's actually 6 versions of every Dream release now that are coming out, and that's great. So that's one of the major features. And I have to say, adding Mac support was great, not just because there's a lot of Mac users, but also because there's some very enthusiastic Mac users that I've been introduced to who have really helped the project out. And so it's been really positive to have that. And then I'd say the other major things was just, we had to support in 2.1 for a lot more Windows-based games. So, I'd sort of dabbled with Windows support for Escape from Monkey Island and Grim Fandango, but with 2.1, I heard of this game called Indiana Jones and the Emperor's Tomb, and I thought, not the Emperor's Tomb, the Infernal Machine, and which I actually had never even played before. You even mentioned it. I knew that LucasArts had done a few Indiana Jones games after I left, but I had no idea that they'd done one based on the Jedi Knight engine. And so I decided that I would see if I could get it running, and that kind of led to me adding a whole bunch of Windows-based games. So 2.1 was great because you could run a lot of these games that were for Windows that were hard to get running on modern systems, and you couldn't run them at all except for maybe Wine or other emulation platforms on the Mac and Linux. And so the idea is to make it super easy to run these games now. And so you get things like Jedi Knight and Indiana Jones and Desktop Adventures, which is one of my personal favorites. I have a good, when we get to that one, I have a fun history to tell you about that and my work with it on the Mac. So that was great. And then we're currently looking at the alpha of I'm calling it 3.0 because a lot's changed under the hood. What I've done for this release is I've really focused back on the DOS side because there's a finite number of Lucasfilm and LucasArts DOS games. Whereas the Windows games kind of stretch out quite long into the future. And I don't know how many of those I'll be able to support before, they become too heavy to run in emulation. But I figured I'd at least try to my goal with this release is to get the rest of the Lucasfilm, LucasArts DOS games, and even some tangentially related Lucasfilm, Lucasfilm games. They did license out to a couple other people. And so I thought it'd be kind of fun. Since I basically have a generic DOS emulator, I should be able to run most things, though obviously I haven't tested it as broadly as something like DOSBox. So the idea is to get the rest of the LucasArts catalog in the DOS era complete for this release, and then after this release, I plan to go back and add some more Windows titles, and maybe even add some interesting titles from Lucas Learning or other Lucas-related titles of the era.
So I presume that unlike the Windows games, the DOS games are easier to emulate, given that you have a complete DOS emulator and you can just run the games on it, or am I mistaken?
They're hard in a different way. So I would say that emulating DOS games, because you had to write to the metal of the system, you didn't have an operating system to write to. So, you get a new game, and if they're using the same engine as other games, generally they all behave the same. But then you get a new game, and it's like, oh, he's talking to the Sound Blaster in a completely different way that these other games weren't talking to it. And I'd never seen somebody talk to it that way, and so therefore it's revealing limitations in my Sound Blaster emulation. Or they're doing tricks with the VGA graphics card that I haven't, implemented that. So it's caused me to really beef up the quality of the underlying emulation in the video system, and I've had to add some other key bits of support that I was missing previously in order to support these new DOS games, especially these earlier DOS games, because the earlier games relied even more on diverse hardware and touching the system at the lowest levels than the later games. And some of the earlier ones had hard-coded copy protection, even where they scanned the disk sectors of the floppy disk that they assumed was in the drive, and so in an emulation you have to be able to support that, even though we're not really dealing with floppy images directly when Dream mostly deals with files. So it becomes kind of an interesting thing. So it's a whole different set of challenges. On the Windows side, it's much more once sound works for one game, it tends to be pretty easy to get it to work for future games, within some small limitations. Whereas on the DOS side, you never know. You get a new engine and it's completely different.
Now, in some of the newly supported Windows games, there are Windows UI pop-ups like the Mortimer launcher and the Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine save game screen. How'd you handle that one?
That was actually just a lot of work. It really was. Honestly, if it weren't for wanting to get Indiana Jones and the Desktop Adventures going, I probably would not have put as much effort into it. But the Desktop Adventures and Yoda Stories, which is basically the same engine, are both Windows GUI games. I mean, they run in a window with, and they expect to be able to pop up, dialogues. The dialogues that you have, even though they're presented as bubbles on the screen, are actually like Windows dialog boxes with all the Chrome stripped off them and drawing text using Windows, widgets. And it's all very finicky and required me to put quite a lot of support in to do all this stuff. But once I got kind of started with it, it became more and more like I'm pulling a thread, and you're pulling the thread and you're like, oh, it's working now. And I got it basically working, except I needed to touch up these things. And then I find out that some games, even the 3D games, like Infernal Machine, they bring up, system dialogues and show, that kind of thing. And I'm like, shoot, now I need to get it working for this as well. So it ended up being a lot more extensive to get all this stuff working. But because I'd done the Yoda Stories work, when I hit the case of Infernal Machine wanting to bring it up, I'm like, oh, well, I've already done a lot of the work for it. So I feel like my journey into Windows emulation has been very fortuitous in that I've picked exactly the right titles to interest me that are small steps forward, so that when I hit the next title that asks for even more, I don't feel like I have to write the whole thing. I'm like halfway there. I'm 75% of the way there. I only need to do this extra 25% to get it, for this game. And then I hit another game. I was like, okay, well, now I need another 10%. And it feels like the more games I add on the Windows side, the more complete the system becomes. And so it's building on itself. The fact that I started with Curse of Monkey Island as my first Windows supported game in the first version of Dream, I hardly had to support much of Windows at all in order to make that work. I mean, it really pretty much just puts up a screen and that's it. It plays the sounds, but it doesn't display any Windows GUI. So that was very lucky that it didn't need any of that because I bypassed the launchers and everything. Of course, if you run it on a Windows machine, there's a launcher that brings up a Windows GUI. And actually, I've been thinking I could go back and make those work in theory, but I don't know if it's worth the time to get all that stuff working. It's usually just presenting, README files and lets you install DirectX and stuff that's all kind of built in. And in fact, it confuses people when they think, oh, I have to install DirectX, or do I have to install DirectX? And like from Dream's perspective, that stuff's just always present and just always works. So it's better to just kind of skip that if it's not really offering anything to the user. You'll see if we run Mortimer that it actually has a pretty extensive launcher that I couldn't bypass because all the setup for the players and configuration is in Windows user interface, and so I couldn't really bypass it.
And in our last conversation, you said that in order to emulate the Windows or support the Windows games, you had to run the games, and then whenever the game would call a function, a Windows function, then either the emulation would crash, and then you'd add a dummy function and see what you need to do in that dummy function in order to make it work. So I think that if you add enough Windows games, you'll eventually recreate Windows 95 from scratch.
It has felt like that. Every step along the way has forced me to expand outward what I've done. I mean, with this is a little low level, but Curse of Monkey Island, it runs one or two threads, so I had to make threading work in Windows from the beginning. But then Mortimer actually launches multiple processes. So the front end with the GUI and lets you do all the setup is one program, and then it launches another program. I had no plans to support that from the beginning, and I had to retrofit I had to lift everything up to like one level so I could have an entire Windows system running one program and another system running another program. It doesn't run like it does in Windows where it's all on the same system. I actually recreate two behind the scenes. You don't notice it, but behind the scenes there's literally two emulators running, one for the launcher and one for the game itself. And so when they switch back and forth, I'm kind of switching back and forth between them, though they're both kind of running at the same time, like a Windows system does, because the launcher kind of needs to do a little bit of work in the background when the game is running and that sort of thing. It doesn't like to just be completely shut out. So I feel like I'm building more of an operating system every time I take a step forward. And yes, it is getting there. Ultimately, it'd be nice if I could run a lot of these early Windows 9X games, because they are getting harder and harder to run on modern systems. And, once I get to a happy point with the Lucas ecosystem, it's entirely possible I may explore other areas of games that are hard to run on modern systems, because, I have an engine that'll is probably 90% of the way to running a lot of games. And I just kind of need to try those games out, fill in the functions that they're calling or tweak a few things and get them up and running. It'd be great to see more stuff running.
I have an entire list of games, of non-Lucasfilm games that I need you to add support for, that I couldn't run for the past 2 decades or so.
See, that's the holy grail. I'd love to get more of that there. It's a problem when you write an emulator, is that all the emulators I've worked on before have been open, in that not just open source, but open. And that you can drop anything you want to on it, and if you're emulating an environment, everything in that environment should run. And something like DOSBox, in theory, should run millions of programs that have been written for DOS over the years. But I mean, that becomes very hard to manage, very hard to test. And so part of the reason why Dream is very focused on Lucasfilm is that I really want to develop the emulation in an environment where I'm not trying to get thousands of games to run, but just a small set, and get those running really well. But fundamentally underneath the covers, it is a pretty generic emulator. So it's really because I have limitations on how it's set up, and that I require the files to be present, and that I know about the games and which files they require, that prevents a random user from trying to run his favorite program on there, which would probably be disappointing, because you run into a lot of debug stuff that you wouldn't want to see. So I don't purport to be DOSBox, but I will say that during the development of 3.0, I have been doing a lot of work to fill in the nooks and crannies of things that I punted on when I did my earlier DOS emulation, because my goal with 3.0 is to kind of do DOS emulation for all the Lucas games and then just be done with DOS for the foreseeable future. And so, I have a much better video emulation. I have much better video BIOS emulation. My BIOS emulation just filled in a bunch of things. I'm hoping to fix the bug where, in Rebel Assault 2, if you're in the launcher, which I couldn't get rid of that launcher either because there's a lot of tweaky parameters in there, you can test your system and it crashes right now in Dream, which I try to warn people about, but I get bug reports that people are testing their system, which I told you not to do, and it still crashes. So, I'm hoping to actually make that, work so that I don't get the bug reports anymore, and also fill in that little nook and cranny of DOS CD emulation that I haven't quite gotten around to doing. So, it's just a lot of detail work, and I completed. I actually went to Microsoft released the sources for MS-DOS, 1.1 and 2.0, so I was able to. I had a few questions about how DOS behaved in certain ways, and I was able to actually go back to the source literally and see what they were doing back in the 2.0 days, at least, and understand a little bit like how things work. And so, especially when working on these earlier games that I added in 3.0, they were much more of the DOS 2, DOS 3 era of games, and so they don't require much more than that. And so I actually went through and completed. So in theory, I wrote a bunch of DOS functions that I hadn't bothered to implement. And so now I've implemented like every DOS function that was supported, through DOS 2.x at least, because I had a reference for how they were supposed to work. And so in theory, any DOS game that only used those functions should work, in my emulation system if you can, finagle it into the Dream environment. And so, my goal is to have that pretty solid and then move on to Windows. And then, where I go for the future is hard to say. It's really hard to say.
And the beauty of Dream is the fact that it runs as a native Windows 10 or Windows 11 app. And that's important because, especially now in the age of live streaming, it's practically impossible to run things with Windows compatibilities because usually when you live stream, you have the game screen and then you have the chat and you have everything arranged. And whenever you run something with Windows compatibility or with all the weird launchers that you have on GOG and on Steam, messes up your resolution and you can't do anything. So it's a thing of beauty.
It's really nice. I really hate having to run old games now because it's just like I wish it would run in an environment like Dream where it just works and all the no graphics resolutions are changed or, full screen effect. Oh, I should mention one other 3.0 feature, which I don't know if you'll be able to demonstrate because we're on, I don't know what resolution you're recording at, but I did add at request of several people CRT simulation effect. So especially for the older DOS games, you can see, your scan lines and that kind of thing. And so there's some shaders that are implemented. I took inspiration from what DOSBox staging was doing, and in fact got some great support from John Novak, who did all the shader support and CRT support. He spent hundreds of hours tweaking the things and staring at like CGA monitors, trying to make his CGA look as close to real CGA as possible, given the shader parameters and everything like that. And I've always shied away from providing CRT shader support because they're infinitely tweakable. They generally have tons of parameters and you can tweak them, and I find them overwhelming and frustrating to use as a user. I'm not a tweaker. I want things to just work. And DOSBox staging, they took an approach of it just works. And I said, hey, finally somebody did it right, or the way I would want to do it. And so I kind of patterned what I did after what they did, and I'm using similar shaders. Their shaders are based off of public domain available shaders, so I pretty much am using roughly the same OpenGL shaders to do the work. But of course, they did their own tweaks to it, and I've done my own tweaks to it. So it's not quite the same, but it's certainly inspired by that. And a lot of the parameters that John worked so hard to figure out to make it look, like as close to CGA and EGA and VGA monitors as possible. He graciously said, hey, just steal my parameters. It's just numbers, it's not even code. So he said, I've used his numbers for the emulation so that they kind of look, they'll probably look pretty similar if you're used to how DOSBox staging looks once the new version comes out.
So basically cross-pollinating between emulators.
Yeah. Hey, I'm pretty collaborative. I'm happy to help. I helped, if you've ever heard of the Pico Gus, it's a sort of a guy who's taken, I don't know if it's FPGA-based or a CPU-based system to emulate the Gus sound card. And he basically puts it's a modern implementation in software for for the sound card, but he also supports some other sound cards, including like the Game Blaster, like the old Creative Labs chips, which I have emulation for. And he said he was struggling with the emulation. I said, let me just send you my code. You can copy my code for that. So, even though I'm officially closed source, I've satisfied a few requests of people who've been like, hey, can you help me out with this? And I'm happy to collaborate. So, just because I don't release the source doesn't mean I'm not happy to collaborate with people and help people out where it makes sense.
Okay, let's play. First game we're going to play today is, given
Your
that
favorite.
I thanked you for it earlier today, Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine. And I'm using the GOG version, and it's interesting that it recognizes it as the GOG version. Are there any specific files that are different from the original release?
It's a good question. For some of the Windows games, it's pretty obvious. So, for example, like Jedi Knight or Outlaws, they have CD audio, which in the GOG version, they've ripped the audio to OGG files, and so I have to support that in a different way because I don't have the actual CD audio. If you install from like a CD image that you've made of your discs, then you can get the real Redbook audio at full, 44 kilohertz uncompressed quality in Dream. But if you run the GOG version, then that's obviously different. For Infernal Machine, I'm trying to remember what it is that's different. They include the updated patch. So the original version had an updater to version 1.2. But I'd have to do a side-by-side comparison. I actually do have the code here. So like while you're getting started, I could actually look and see if I can tell you what the differences are.
Let me launch
I don't think it's very significant for this particular game.
Would you look at that?
It's funny to watch the opening cinematic. I skip it so frequently. I don't think I've seen it more than once or twice.
You call this an opening cinematic?
That very brief thing. I mean, this is what I'm used to seeing.
I was about to ask you if they ran out of budget.
Time to go to work.
This game uses fog a lot, so you can see like the distance. In the distance, it's kind of foggy. That was one of the later things I implemented in the 3D support.
The fog?
Yeah, fog. It's heavily used on the early games, especially to avoid pop-in. You'll see it if you play Shadows of the Empire or something like that, which was a Nintendo 64 game, which was sort of famous for overuse of fog in a lot of the early titles. But they use fog quite a lot to make things... so you don't see the pop-in from things in the background. When you're highly limited on the number of polygons you can render, it was pretty common to use fog.
Usually in the games from the 90s, they used tons of fog.
Yeah.
Not for atmosphere, but because they couldn't handle showing what's far in the distance.
Yeah, and the textures really are this low res.
I presume that you've seen my conversation with Hal Barwood, in which I told him about DREAMM.
Yeah, I hope he checked it out, because several of his games were there. I forgot that he had done this one, but I know he did Desktop Adventures, which was always one of his babies. It was a pretty interesting and unusual title.
Yeah. He invented casual gaming.
I don't know if I go that far, but he certainly played a role. Yeah, I watched you play this on your live stream. I thought, there's some stuff you don't remember about how to get through some of the areas. The controls are definitely finicky in this game. That you got to be right up against things.
Thing looks whippable.
So, as much as I love Infernal Machine, in terms of indie action games in which I think that the controls are still up to modern standards, that would be the Emperor's Tomb.
Yeah.
Wait.
I think you need to use X to jump off.
So the Emperor's Tomb has really nice controls, and the fighting system is still top-notch.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd be able to support that in Dream because of the it's a later game, and well, I mean, okay, so there's two limitations. One is what is the required CPU speed at the time, and the other is
that was 2003.
Yeah, and the other question, that's probably not too bad. I might be able to still run that one fast enough from a CPU perspective. But the other question is, what are their graphics requirements, and how many polygons are they trying to push? Because I think might start to run into limitations. Right now, everything in Dream is software rendered, so I actually run, all this rendering that you're seeing is done on a couple of CPU threads on your computer. I'm not using your graphics card at all, except to display the final screen. This is very much like how we do things in MAME, so obviously that's sort of my pedigree. But I like it because I'm in control of things. And I've also enjoyed learning how to write 3D renderers over the years, and so it's kind of been a interesting challenge. I could look into, and I've thought about it, actually trying to render the 3D using your graphics card. So I'd render it basically to a texture, and then I'd render that texture to the screen. That introduces more complex compatibility concerns and other challenges, and I don't know, whether I can make that work as smoothly. And some games, especially the early games like Grim Fandango, and that rely on being able to poke at the screen pixels and that kind of thing. So, I've thought about it, and it may happen if I, once I revisit the new Windows games, I'll see how far I can take the current technology with its limitations and performance limits, and then see whether I can be happy with it, running the later games, or whether I need to look into other solutions, or maybe I'll just use that as my cutoff and say I'm not going to support games later than a certain year.
Wait, so hardware acceleration would be a problem to implement at this stage in the development?
Well, it's a little bit easier now because for 3.0, I'm not doing my graphics through SDL. I'm doing them through OpenGL directly. So I'm actually talking to 3D hardware in order to render it with the CRT shaders, because I have to use OpenGL shaders for that. That's not something that SDL supports. So previously I was talking to SDL and they were rendering everything with 2D, with their 2D system. And so that was pretty far away from, having to manage textures and send polygons down to the graphics card. But now that I'm directly doing that for OpenGL, the thought of doing it doesn't seem quite so overwhelming. But yeah, it's just more complicated to render it using. Depends on your definition of complicated, I should say. It's a different kind of complicated to render using 3D hardware, because I have to translate the DirectX calls into low-level primitives and deal with the impedance mismatch between OpenGL and DirectX, which isn't an unknown problem. It just is a little harder. But rendering everything in software obviously has its own challenges as well. So I can't exactly say that I'm necessarily taking the easy way out. But I'm a bit partial to software rendering as much as possible, because it leaves me in control 100% of what the final pixels are.
So in our last conversation, we talked about Escape from Monkey Island, which at the time had a limitation for the number of characters that could be on screen because of the number of polygons. It was 3 characters in addition to Guybrush in each scene.
Yeah. And
since our last conversation, I also talked to Mike Stemley and Brett Mogilevsky, who worked on the DREAMM engine. And so I asked them directly if that was indeed the case, because that was my theory. And that was indeed the case. They ran into a certain number of polygons that they couldn't handle. And so even though there are scenes in which there are 4 characters, it's just because they're half bodies. So for example, there's a scene with 3 judges behind the table and a swimmer and in Guybrush. And so the judges don't have their lower half of the body. So that's how they handled it.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of handling polygons, do you know what game that's currently supported on Dream handles the most polygons?
So in terms of polygons, it's actually, you'd be surprised, it's Escape from Monkey Island. And those scenes are actually the highest polygons I've seen. And they're like several thousand per frame, and rendering them all in software. I'm actually fairly impressed that it runs as well as it does. But, it does not hit full frame rate on some systems for sure. But like on a modern, like Mac M1, my iMac, or I don't have an iMac. I have a Mac Mini. I get 60 frames per second even when it's pushing 3,000 polys per frame. So it can handle quite a lot. I'm actually pretty impressed with how well it scales. But I know that there are new effects and other things happening in the later games that are going to start to push it there. And it's not an action game either. So hitting 60 frames per second is not like super critical. But you're gonna care if you're running some future Emperor's Tomb and you can't hit a frame rate that allows you to run the game smoothly. So fortunately, this game pushes pretty low poly counts. If you do Shift Alt V, you can see little video stats in your upper right corner and see how you're doing.
Alt V. Wow.
So you can see in the bottom it's showing right now it's rendering about 1,100 triangles per frame. And
wow, that's 60 frames per second.
Yeah, so the bottom right, so this game's a little weird in that they render two scenes. So even though I say it's 110 frames per second, that's not right in the 3D. That's from the 3D perspective, and it's rendering a scene to clear everything, which is like a super cheap scene to do, and then a scene to render everything. So you actually have to divide that number by 2. That's sort of an internal glitch. But yeah, you can see right now you're running 60 frames per second.
Now I feel bad that I'm recording this conversation in 30 frames per second.
It's even worse for me because, of course, I'm seeing your screen, video transmitted, and it's looking glitchy. But I'm glad to see that it's actually running smoothly for you.
Psychic premonition about the treasures I should have found.
Okay, so we finished the first level of Infernal Machine. So let's switch to our next game. So our next game is one of the newly supported ones in the alpha version, which is
gotta scroll.
Another thing in this new version is the carousel.
Yes. So I had way too many games supported, and I tried to fit them all in that giant thing. And of course, me being the developer, I have every game that I work on because I need to test them to make sure I haven't broken things. And so it was becoming impossible to even select a game because it was had to be too precise in requiring it. So I knew I had to do something, and I decided to just extend my visuals to have a carousel. I added some animation in the menus too, so you can kind of get a sense of where they're going. And if you need to jump to a game, you can just type the first character of the name, and it'll jump right there if it's easier.
Let's see. Wow.
And if you keep typing it, it'll switch between all the games of that letter.
Right. So I have 3 games that start with M.
Yes.
Okay, let's install this game, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, the action game. English pre-release.
Yeah, so
September 25th.
This looks like a pre-release version that I found because it behaves a little differently. I'm trying to remember what the details were. Only when you started, I'll remember. I have to refresh my memory.
Let's install the game. I used to play this game a lot as a kid.
Oh, it didn't go right to it. Scroll to the left there. You should see it. There it is with the horse. Yeah. Okay. That's a bug in the current alpha, is it's not automatically showing you the game that you just installed. It should be a smoother experience than that one.
Yeah, but you have the new icon, the new badge that appears whenever you install something new. So that's great. That points you to the right direction.
Yeah. But in the past, when you installed something, it would leave you on this screen right here to kind of so you knew exactly what to run. So that must be a glitch in the current release. But that's what alphas are for, right?
Yep.
You can Shift Alt V to put away your stats, because that'll probably be distracting for the rest of the.
Okay.
So you're running in EGA mode, yeah. I hope to automate that a little bit because I know which mode you should run in based on which video selection you've made in the configuration, and so I probably should. It's easy to forget what you've configured and be like, did I have it configured for Tandy or for EGA? And so you got to choose the right one.
So I used to love this game so much. So because first of all, I used to love every LucasArts game that would come out, and since back then in '89, didn't have that many LucasArts releases per year. So you had Zack McCracken a year before, and then you had Maniac Mansion 2 years before that, and so there weren't that many releases. And so I was really excited when this came out, and then I played it, and then I stopped being excited about it.
It's a very hard game. I actually don't know how well it runs because I have not taken the time to learn or hack up some cheats or anything to figure out how to play this game well enough that I don't die when I meet like the first couple enemies. Well, that's smart. You stand above them. See, I always just walk right up to that guy and then die right away. See, I'm glad you're playing this for me. Maybe I'll see stuff I've never seen before.
Yeah, what you're going to see is the fact that all of the enemies have the same sprites as Indie.
Oh, yeah. They're just different
colors. In a moment,
huh?
we're going to see that. And also, I was really excited about the fact that, it was 89 and having a pretty, let's call it photorealistic a photo of Harrison Ford in the bottom right.
Yeah.
It's really exciting for 89.
Especially
at the time, hearing, your favorite movie themes on your PC speaker was also kind of exciting because, well... Okay. I'm ready.
I'll try not to distract you.
Here goes. Boom.
You really got to time that right and know that he's coming. It's not a game you can react to in the heat of the moment. You got to pretty much know what's coming. Exactly.
You need to know when these things are falling from... when this thing is falling from the rope.
And of course, it puts you right at... Oh, no, good. It didn't put you back at the beginning this time.
Yeah, and we have checkpoints. Like, that's going to help. This game is impossible.
Well, when you paid $40 for a game and this is all you got, you had to make sure that it lasted at least, a little bit. It had some challenge. Otherwise, you'd never feel like you got your money's worth. Okay,
so check out the enemies. The enemies have the same sprites as Indie.
That's funny.
I mean, they ran out of budget so quickly that they didn't even create. So at this point, I don't know where to go because at any point an enemy might come down the rope.
That was pretty smooth. That's good.
I think it's the 8-year-old in me that's taking control. Whoop. Okay. Now we're getting places.
How did you punch? Was that a separate key from
No, it's the same whip? Key.
Okay. It just knows to punch when you're that close?
No, I click the spacebar. It's the same key as the...
But you have a whip.
But
the whip only has a limited number of shots. I see.
Yeah, because, a whip works exactly like a gun. So here's the cross I'm supposed to get. Jeez.
This is exciting. I've never seen this part before.
Few people have. So.
Oh.
Wait, I have enough lives. I get this checkpoint, so as you probably guessed, I liked the Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade graphic adventure game better than this one.
The action games were pretty much an afterthought as far as I can tell. I mean, obviously people put work into it. I don't want to cast too much shade on them because every work of gaming or movies or art is an effort by somebody. But at the same time, they clearly put a lot more manpower and work into creating the adventure games than they did in the action games.
Maybe I should interview the people who worked on this game. I know that Steve Purcell created a version of the sprites for, I think, one of the platforms, not this one. This one looks horrible, but his version looks great. And the thing is that, one thing I've learned this past year is the fact that there are some games that developers worked on and that they hated working on, and they hate the final product. So it's perfectly okay to trash them. One thing that disappointed me is the fact that all of the people who worked on the Dig suffered greatly from working on the Dig. And so, apart from Michael Land, I don't think
he got what he wanted out of it, man. He got that soundtrack, the lush soundtrack, and I remember all the fights that were going on about he wanted 16-bit sound for his soundtrack, which totally makes sense for the kind of soundtrack it is. But we just didn't have enough space for the amount of music he wanted in 16 bits. So I remember they compromised, and it's all encoded in this custom 12-bit format. That's better than 8-bit, but not quite full 16-bit quality to get it to fit on the CD.
For me, Loom and The Dig are my favorite point-and-click adventure games. And so I talked to every person who worked on every version of The Dig, and no one could say anything nice about The Dig. I even talked to David Fox. David Fox was the director of operations when they started the production of the first version of The Dig. Mm-hmm. And I asked him about it. I mean, he didn't work on it, so I thought that he'd have something nice to say. But he didn't. The only thing he said was that he's glad that he didn't work on The Dig.
Yeah, unfortunately, that game did chew up a lot of people to get it out. And, I came in when it was on its final iteration, so I wasn't even working in there at the time in the previous iterations. I just knew that it was coming up, and it was something they wanted to release on the Mac, and it was SCUM-based, and it was going to be pretty similar to Full Throttle, so it wasn't going to be a very hard thing for me to add support for.
Okay, next game I'm going to play is another game I played back in the day. Pipe Dream, but we're going to install the version that's called Pipe Mania, because in the UK, apparently, the term Pipe Dream doesn't exist, or they didn't think about that wordplay at the time.
Yeah.
That's also possible.
Yeah, I don't know why it has two different versions of the title screen. That's really pretty much the only difference in the logo. They have a different logo of the people who were playing.
So this was Pipe Mania, and now I'm going to install Pipe Dream.
Which is the one I'm familiar with. I actually had the Mac version of this, which was done by Eric Johnston, who is the famous Mac developer. He'd be an interesting guy to get on your show if you want to talk about the early Mac SCUM releases. He's a very fascinating guy. He's excellent.
And the thing about Pipe Dream is that we couldn't establish the timeline of Pipe Mania and Pipe Dream because, on one hand, Steve Purcell did this artwork and the cover art for Pipe Dream, but Pipe Mania uses the same title screen and part of the Steve Purcell artwork for the cover art. So we couldn't establish the timeline of why this was released a year earlier and how come LucasArts, Lucasfilm Games was involved in the creation of this game. Because this was supposed to be a game that they bought from an external company.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know.
Yeah, there are a few licensed games in the early days that are kind of interesting. Night Shift is another one that's in a similar boat where I don't think it was really developed in-house, but they somehow decided to license it.
So it's the same thing, just as Pipe Dream.
Yeah. Apart from that, I can't really see many differences.
Did you ever play this game?
Yes, I played this on the Mac, actually. You have a very different strategy than me. You just keep churning through them. I always tried to figure out, in the future, where am I going to need the next piece and try to guess. But I always guess wrong, so I end up kind of just building.
So I created a similar gameplay during my years as a game developer. I had several clients that wanted a similar game with a similar gameplay. And the thing is that nowadays, this gameplay is used for depictions of hacking in various hacker games. So this way, this depicts the hacking of the network because you somehow find a...
I can see that. Computer food, interesting. So yeah, this just uses the good old PC speaker for sound, so you get the... kind of like the last Indiana Jones game, you just kind of get single note melodies.
Yeah.
Weird sounds like that. But they did okay with it. I mean, it's not the most annoying sound. Certainly some early PC games could be quite annoying to play because of the sound would just be... You always want to have an option to turn off the music because it got pretty piercing at times. And of course, the PC speaker was in your speaker and they didn't have a headphone jack. So you got the sound whether you wanted it or not. So as always, you had to provide options to turn that thing off. even if you installed a Game Blaster or a Sound Blaster card in your machine, you still had that PC speaker that was going to play whether the speaker was in your
the PC speaker
PC.
had one volume.
Yes, the volume control. In fact, I actually play the PC speaker at lower volume because it can be so annoying. So I actually played about quarter of maximum volume, what you're hearing there. Otherwise, it gets too stressful.
Okay, next game we're going to play is the Dig demo. Now, I know that you've added support for various demos of the games that are currently supported in DREAMM. Do you have anything to say about did you have to do anything special to add support for these demos?
A lot of them.
Did you work hard?
A lot of them I actually surprisingly did. So the thing about the demos is some of them are just hacked down versions of the game, and those are pretty easy to get. But some of them are done before the game is released to get excitement about the game before the release, and so they're using earlier versions of the Scum engine, or like they've hacked things to work. So like the worst one absolutely was Sam & Max, because there are literally 4 different engines they've used. There's so many demos for Sam & Max. I found like 4 different pedigrees of demos. Like there's a very early one that's based on the Day of the Tentacle engine. And Sam & Max was done at a time when they were transitioning from 16-bit to 32-bit. So like the floppy versions of Sam & Max all ran 16-bit code. They could use extended EMS, they could use extended memory, but they were still 16-bit DOS programs. Whereas the talkie versions of Sam & Max were 32-bit. They used DOS 4GW and they used DOS extenders, and that was a pretty big transition for one game. And so even those 2 versions are there. But then when it comes to the demos, for the early ones, they had some that were based on the Day of the Tentacle engine that were released before Sam & Max was ever released, even in the floppy version. And then there are demos that were done on the talkie ones that are based on the 32-bit engine. And there's demos that are based on an earlier version of the 32-bit engine where they sort of had a hybrid version of iMuse that used different sound drivers. And so like I've had to do so much. That was by far the most complex set of demos to get working. But at least for 3.0, I think I have all the versions that I found of Sam & Max demos working to some degree, which is kind of nice.
The Secret of Mankind also has a bunch of demos. Was there any problem getting them to run?
Not as many. They're pretty standard. The Scum engine wasn't going through quite as much flux at that time, so I don't feel like even if they're running different versions, they pretty much all run the same. It's EGA versus VGA is really the big difference, and Passport to Adventure is pretty much the Monkey Island engine, so that kind of got that one for free, which is sort of a multi-demo.
Okay, so the final game was the final version was created on November 1st, 1995, and this demo was created on June 5th, 1995.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because we're about to see that
you are Commander Boston Lowe, NASA's best shuttle jockey. You've been enlisted to command a space shuttle mission to correct the orbit of an errant asteroid. No one could prepare you for what would happen next.
Does this have the press conference in the... I don't think it does. The opening video for the real game has a press conference. And there's a scene where the astronaut, the hands, they're talking with their hands quite a lot because it's all animated. And there's a scene where it kind of looks like he bumps into the microphone with his hand, and it's just the way the animation turned out. And the sound guys thought it would be funny if they would add like a feedback, little microphone feedback. So if you watch the animation for the opening one, you should listen for that little bit of feedback that happens when he does that hand gesture that kind of looks like it bumps into the microphone. That was a little joke that the sound guys put in. I remember people laughing about that at the time.
Now I have to watch that.
You have to watch it sometime.
I know when I talked to Graham Annable, he told me that he did the silhouette of the journalist that's talking in the press conference.
Huh.
The Dig has a bunch of art styles because a bunch of artists worked on it in various periods of time. And so I tried to figure out which element fit his art style, and I couldn't place any of them. But eventually, when he said that it was the silhouette of the journalist, then I saw it.
Stranded on a desolate alien world, your crew turns to you for leadership. What mysteries are hidden beneath the thick alien dusts of time? Your mission is now one of survival in elements that are completely unfamiliar. Can you survive long enough to unravel the mysteries and find a way home?
Nope.
Where are we?
I'm not sure. This sure doesn't look like the inside of that asteroid.
Who are these people?
No.
That's true, they don't really tell you.
Low to Space Shuttle Atlantis. Come in, Atlantis. Static. We must be out of range.
Yeah, but how far out of range?
I remember playing this demo quite go ahead.
The interesting thing is that where this demo was compiled on June 5th, and the game was supposed to be released in 5 months. And so that's not the final voice acting. That these are not the people who are voicing the characters in the game. Boston Lowe is voiced by Robert Patrick.
Oh, really? That's right. I guess I didn't pick up on the fact that it was a different voice.
Where are you going, Lowe?
Well, I don't figure we'll get home by standing around.
It might be safer to wait here.
Wait for what?
It seems like we need a leader to make the decisions.
And? Let's go.
I feel I should lead the expedition.
And what makes you more qualified than me?
Or me, for that matter?
It appears to me that we are standing on the ruins of an ancient civilization. Intelligent civilization. Since this has become more of an archaeological dig than a shuttle mission, my background qualifies me as the better leader.
I started as commander of this mission, and I will finish as commander.
Easy, boys. We need to stick together on this. Until we know more about what we're dealing with, I think we should work as a team, with Lowe as the leader. Brink, okay?
Okay.
So as someone who worked at LucasArts at around that time, did people at LucasArts actually trash the game during the production? Like they do nowadays in my conversations with them?
To some degree. I mean, you know, it had become kind of an albatross around the company's neck because it had been promised so many times and gone through so many fits and starts. But I think when it came out, I mean, I don't remember a lot of negativity, but I do remember, like, there definitely felt like a desire to just get the darn thing shipped, you know. And so I think even if there were a few warts that people might have wanted to go back and clean up or fix up or do a little bit better, that, like, people knew that there just wasn't ever going to, we needed to get the thing out the door and move it beyond where we were at. And so I think, you know, to some degree, most people, if they had opinion, probably kept their mouth shut about it for the most part, to just because they didn't want to, you know, they wanted it to succeed. We all wanted the company to succeed, right? So I think it went out, you know, as is, and, you know, it's a pretty good game, but there's definitely some things about it, especially, you know, when you see it over and over again, certain things start to grate at you a little while, and you're just kind of like, yeah, okay, that's not the greatest, or, you know, I wonder how that plays to the external audience. You know, I'm glad to hear that there are people who love the game, like it's one of the favorite adventure games of all time. You know, and I'm not one of them because it never really connected with me in the same way. But I also saw it.
No one is. I'm the only one.
You're not the only one. You're not the only one.
So the next game we're going to play is Night Shift, which is a PC game that I haven't played in real time. So my first experience with Night Shift is right now.
Okay. It's, again, a hard game. It's in the DOS era of games are hard because you need to get the most you can out of them. It's got a pretty catchy tune. My wife was complaining when I was playing it and debugging it that she kept getting it in her head. So yes, you need to do the passcode here. looks like you've at least played it once because you kind of already knew how to get that far.
Because I what?
You knew how to get as far as you got. I don't let this guy. Yeah, there you go.
The copy protection?
Like, do you know what to do here?
No.
Okay, so apparently that's the copy protection is also a passcode, so you can enter a passcode there, but leave it alone. Just don't touch it. Just hit enter, and you'll. And then just hit enter here. You have to build 5. Get the factory to build that many items.
You know, as a PC gamer who played games in the 90s, I know how to play new games by clicking every button and finding out which one works.
Yes.
By the way, the catchy tune, I talked to Michael Land and I played the Night Shift tune to him because he worked on the adaptation of this tune.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm. So what am I supposed to do in this game?
You can jump on those platforms, but the platforms are kind of hard to pick out.
Okay.
So you're supposed to go up from here. That's the first non-obvious hint. So if you look on the left side of the screen, there are some platforms there, which if you can get to the ones up top there, you can go up. And it actually does feature some smooth scrolling with some VGA effects I had to implement. But
this is some Commander Keen type scrolling.
I know. So I'm going to admit I haven't gotten past even level 1 in this game, and I don't actually quite understand what I'm supposed to be doing. I can jump on the platforms and try to get higher, but eventually you get to the top, and then I think you're supposed to pick up items. You grab that match thing, and then you use the spacebar sometimes to do something, or... Yeah. If you're a fan of Night Shift, you did something. Did you get to the end?
No. This feels like it goes against every safety regulation out there. I'm not sure that if people are supposed to jump on platforms.
Yeah, I don't know.
Either Night Shift or in general.
I think this was a game that, well, again, you said was licensed, and I think I heard a story that they rebadged it a little bit, because you'll notice it has a logo on the opening screen that looks like ILM. It's obviously a pattern after ILM, but it's not literally ILM. It's some knockoff name that you're supposed to be working. And they changed the theme. Originally, it was supposed to be building random toys, but then they changed them to build Star Wars toys. So all the toys are Star Wars figures now. And the copy protection is all Star Wars toys and stuff. So yeah, it's a platformer of some sort. I'm not quite sure.
Wait. Okay. I think I got it.
What the goal is and how to complete the level. You're supposed to pick up some items, I think.
Okay. Here's an item. Wait.
It's hard to tell where the platforms begin and end. Like, where are you allowed to walk and where are you not allowed to walk?
Okay. I got the monkey wrench.
Uh-huh.
I can use it in Monkey Island 2 now.
Hey, there's another one. I think those might just be for points, but maybe you need to use them for something. So it looks like you're at the top of the world now. But again, I'm not an expert at this game. I only know it enough to get it basically working. So I'll look forward to seeing what Michael Land says about the Night Shift theme. But this is one of the games that actually has a CMS-based soundtrack as well. So it's kind of nice to test out the Game Blaster sound. You clearly have to do something.
Well, you won't have to wait for long because my conversation with him premieres tomorrow.
All right. Did you see how I set that up for you?
Yeah.
I'm a good pitch man.
But our conversation will premiere a month from now.
That's true.
The tomorrow is irrelevant. Okay, the next game we're going to play is Secret Weapons of the Luftwaffe.
So are you a flight sim guy?
No.
Neither am I. I don't think you have it installed yet. I didn't see it in the list yet.
Oh, I don't have it. That's right. Let's install it. Found an unfamiliar set of matching files.
I'll have to see what I haven't. So for a lot of the new games, I haven't gone through the process of finding every version out there yet. So that's got to happen eventually. So it's pretty easy to find versions I haven't found. It should still work, I think, but...
So what do you call an unfamiliar set of files? It has the same file list, but their sizes are different than the ones you're expecting?
Checksums are different. Yeah, maybe the checksums are different. I checksum the first 2 megabytes of every file, which covers most small files for DOS games. And then for like the later games, I didn't want to check some, heavyweight to check some, 30 megabyte movies or whatever. So I decided the first 2 megabytes will cover everything that will fit on a 1.4 megabyte floppy disk. So it'll cover, installer files, the entirety of all your installer files, but it won't cover giant movies. And so that was my compromise. And so what I do is when I identify, you have to have all the files that are required, and then it has to have, if any of the files don't match the CRCs of the files that I know about, then it's considered an unfamiliar set of files. I'll still let you run it, but it comes with a little extra ID afterwards to indicate the type of files. Now, the current alpha you're running has a bug in it where it doesn't show the IDs, so you're not actually seeing the little ID. So it looks like it's a fully supported version, and it says it's fully supported, but in the real version, when you install an unfamiliar set of files, it'll have a different message in the bottom there that says, warning, this game, I don't know whether this game is going to run. I haven't tested it. It's sort of a disclaimer.
So you just informed everyone how you can create malware for Dream, because the first 2 megabytes can be the same thing, and then the rest of the file can be malware.
Yes. Well, be careful, you malware people.
Going against the retro community. Look at that logo!
I know, isn't that a cool logo?
This theme music was written by Michael Land.
Oh, okay. Yeah, he's had his hand in pretty much everything that LucasArts did. I can understand why you talked to him for so long. One of the tricks with some of these early games is that they are somewhat speed dependent of the processor, and so I have a limiter in Dream to limit the speed, but I'm not quite sure what I should set it to. So, right now it might be set a little on the low side or the high side. I can't tell. So. If it looks kind of chunky, again, I can't see your real frame rate, but if it's not running super smooth, it's probably because I have the speed limiter on this set a little low. But if it's running smooth, then it's probably okay.
I have a sense I'm winning this game.
Except you just stalled your plane, so now you're gonna... Oh, it recovered for you. Yeah, the early flight sims are most of the flight sims that Totally Games did, and there was this trio of them from the beginning, which was like Battlehawks, 1942, Their Finest Hour, and then Secret Weapons of the Luftwaffe. This was their trio of World War II fighting games, and then of course they went on to do X-Wing and TIE Fighter, and X-Wing versus TIE Fighter. So it's the same group of people, and you can kind of see the pedigree there. But these early games are. I find that I don't really know what I'm doing, but I find I can at least fly and generally not crash. It's a little hard. Unlike a real flight sim where I would probably nosedive the plane, before nothing. These games, I feel like I can at least, fly around and try to shoot at things, even though hitting things seems to be quite difficult.
Yeah, and it seems that Steven Spielberg really liked this game.
Oh, did he? Yeah. I hadn't seen references to that. One of the challenges with some of the games, especially the flight sim games, is they came with all these add-on packs to support different missions and different
and basically to get more money.
Yeah, because they were cheap to put out. You already did the game engine. You were just kind of creating some new scenarios and some new missions, and then charge $20 for them or whatever. And
so you guys invented DLCs.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah. But actually, it was providing real content and real gameplay, so it was not quite as frivolous as here's a new skin for your character or whatever. But Dream has a trouble with them currently with the add-on packs because there's no good way to support adding them on. So one of the things I'm working on for this version is to support the add-on packs properly. And Secret Weapons of Luftwaffe is the worst one because it has 4 different expansion packs, which were different planes and different missions. Are you going to try to land? Yeah, I don't think you actually crashed. I think you just bounced off the runway there.
Wow.
So yeah, they're pretty forgiving.
Seems like my plane is ground resistant.
Yeah, I get the feeling that these sims that they did for these games were sort of midway between arcade simulation, which is all about, just shoot down as many things as you can, and really ignored the mechanics of it. But they're not quite as hardcore as like, Microsoft Flight Simulator or the hardcore flight simulators. They kind of had that middle ground there. I think that's why they're pretty beloved. A lot of people like them, especially, the X-Wing and TIE Fighter. Those were quite popular games.
Okay, now we're going to play a game that I think most people don't even know it exists. It's the Fate of Atlantis action game.
Yes. This is a very weird game.
But it has LucasArts logo, so it's nice.
Yeah. Check out those quality fade effects there.
It's the statue from the game.
Yeah, if the last Crusade action game felt like a sort of an afterthought, this one feels even more so in terms of, like, I think it was only released in Europe. I don't think it was ever released in the US. And very few people know about it. It seems like they swept it under the rug pretty fast. So there is copy protection here. You got to select N using arrow keys. It's got the same check mark as Night Shift. It's like the exact same graphic. I think they just stole it there.
Yeah, I think it's the assembly line maybe created this game.
It might be the same people, yeah. So it's got this isometric view, and you can move around. It's got tank controls, so you turn left and right, and then you move forward with the forward arrow.
Oh, in the meantime, I'm currently choosing something in my inventory. Okay.
Oh yeah.
So I have the whip. Yeah, now we're talking. Okay.
I think you can play the casino games, and people will come up and just start hitting you. And this, my impression of this game is I don't quite understand how it works, but they'll come up here and just start beating on you. Yeah, and you can switch characters. You can switch characters with Sophia as well in the game, and then people will come up and beat up her too. So they're very gender neutral when it comes to who they're willing to beat up in the game. They don't really care whether you're Indy or Sophia. They got it in for you both.
So it's interesting that Fate of Atlantis got so many side products, like the comic book, the Dark Force comic book, and this crappy game. So, but nothing compares to the original.
Yeah, the controls in this game are kind of confounding.
Okay, let me switch to money. Okay, now I have money.
Maybe you can go play the gambling games. There's a guy with the roulette wheel over there. I think maybe you can do that. I think that's why you select the money.
These are the biggest stairs I've ever seen. Okay, this was fun.
Let's just say I would have been pretty disappointed if I spent $40 on this. The thing is that the other thing about DOS games I remember, and this goes back to like the early like Atari 2600 games too, is that you spend $40 on a game, and the sunk cost fallacy would make you try so hard to like that game because you put the money into it. You're like, it has to be worth $40 somehow. And so I would, no matter how bad the game was, I look back at the games that I spent money on, I'm thinking, wow, how did I enjoy this? And the problem is we have such, sophisticated games now and such a choice from a retro gaming perspective of all the good games, that the games that weren't so good, they just feel like really bad. And you're like, how did people enjoy this? But from the perspective of a 10-year-old kid or a 12-year-old kid who got this and put it on his PC and got it to run, and it ran on my PC Junior and even had like the PC Junior graphics support, so it had 16 color graphics, and I'm like, this was amazing, and it was graphically rich, and I loved it. But I look back on it now and I'm like, wow, that just was not such a great game.
I have several games that fit that description. So one of them is Back to the Future 2, which was, I don't think I ever finished the first level.
The licensed games are always the worst, honestly.
Yep. Back to the Future 3, which is another game that I recently, I wanted to look up a playthrough on YouTube, and someone finished it in like 5 minutes.
Wow.
And so I was heavily insulted by the fact that back then I couldn't finish the first level, and he's finishing it in 5 minutes. So, and the worst of them all, the worst offender was the Never-Ending Story 2, the arcade game. That's like the worst game ever. Wow. If you ever add support for it, I'll do an entire live stream of me suffering through 3 hours of the Never-Ending Story.
Well, it's funny because you mentioned that we always refer to Indy Last Crusade as Indy 3 internally, and Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis was Indy 4, even though there was, of course, this was before Crystal Skull was even a gleam in somebody's eye. I recently, one of the games I added that was tangential, Lucasfilm didn't release it, but they licensed it, which was the DOS port of the Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom arcade game, which of course I have familiarity with because in MAME I did the arcade emulation of the Temple of Doom arcade game, which was done by Atari, and it was protected with a slapstick chip, which was one of the early copy protection devices that they put on those games. And so one of my earliest reverse engineering challenges for MAME was to get that chip simulated so that we could run the arcade game there. So the arcade game is an okay game. I don't consider it a particularly great game. Some people love it, so no offense if you love it, but I don't feel like it's a particularly strong game. But the DOS port of the arcade game is like a step down even from that, so it's not super exciting to play. But from a completeness perspective, I was like, yeah, since I got my DOS emulation's getting better, I should try some other games. And so I decided to try some related games, even though it's not technically a LucasArts game.
Now, since we're in the business of crappy Indiana Jones action games, let's play a newly supported game, Indiana Jones and the Revenge of the Ancients.
This was the other one.
I never even heard of that game.
It's a text adventure. And I'll be honest with you, the only reason I support it is because it lets me stress out the text mode emulation of my VGA and CGA and Hercules emulation, because I don't have any games. All the games run in graphics mode, and so I didn't really have any good examples that just sat in text mode, so I could make sure that all the character generation stuff was correct and stuff. And so I'm like, well, here's a game where it runs on Hercules, it runs on CGA and VGA, so you can pick your poison and try all the different text modes. So that's sort of the main reason I have this here.
Nothing says adventure like a text adventure.
Yes. Well, hey, I grew up in the Infocom era. Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is one of my favorite all-time Infocom games, and I played through what was the Leather Goddesses of Phobos and a couple other of the early Infocom games. So I love the Infocom games. Now, they were very interesting because they were released as booters on the PC, which means that they came on a floppy, and you didn't run DOS. You just put the floppy in and you booted your machine, and it just ran right off the boot sector. And I always thought that was kind of cool that you could do that.
Now, text adventures may be fun, but again, this is an Indiana Jones game, which is supposed to be an action-packed adventure, and text adventure doesn't really fit that.
No. And I'll be honest, this is, maybe it's just my lack of patience, but this text adventure is very impenetrable to me. Like, you start off in the situation where basically you'll die after you make a few moves because...
Die.
And they have these responses, so you can't really tell whether... Like, eventually you'll realize what the canned responses are when it doesn't understand what you typed. I think this is one of them. But if you... that's way too sophisticated.
Go north. Wow. Going south, we return to... Okay. Go west. Okay, go east. You trip over your feet, then regain your balance.
So it turns out that you're drugged at the beginning of the game, and that's why you only have a certain number of turns to solve the fact that you're drugged, but I actually don't know what the solution is.
Go south.
I need to look up a playthrough of this to see what you're supposed to do.
Go home.
But I mean, it's a text adventure game. What do you want? There you go.
I wrote, go home. A trapdoor opens at your feet, sending you tumbling down a seemingly endless chute. like a clown shot of a cannon. You are ejected from a hole.
Again, if you spent $40 on this, you would work your butt off to try and figure out how to play this game. So this is released by Mindscape, but it was licensed from Lucasfilm. So
I think that as kids, we didn't want to complain too much because our parents paid $40, or back then it was even more expensive, especially here in Israel. So it spent so much money on these games that we had to keep playing them. Make it seem as if we're enjoying this crap.
Yeah, so maybe it is a great text adventure once you get into it, and maybe it's got some great puzzles, but
I don't think so.
I won't pass judgment on it.
Okay, Monkey Island, Curse of Monkey Island demo.
Oh yeah, it's interesting to see these early versions of the artwork in the games. I think this is one that did release a little bit before the full game released.
Yep. And the interesting thing is that this demo is single-handedly responsible for the addition of Murray in the game. Because when this demo was released, then people really loved the character of Murray. And so Larry Ahern and Jonathan Ackley just added him to a bunch of places, because when you play the final game, you notice that Murray just pops up in different locations, and that's because people actually liked his presence in the...
Yeah, people love Murray. I mean, Ron Gilbert even added him to Return to Monkey Island, and because he recognized that...
the water doesn't have any waves in the demo.
Oh, yeah, you're right. And there's some text written on the notebook, which I don't think was written on there before.
I thwarted his evil plot to marry Elaine.
And the thing is that you also have a different inventory. See, it looks like a rough sketch.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of times the demos, especially in this era, are interesting for the fact that they reveal some different artwork or some new things. I know there are folks out there who have studied them in quite a lot of detail. You can go down quite the rabbit holes.
The interesting thing is that it seems that back in the 90s, you guys at LucasArts handled the demos just like Flash developers handled everything. Instead of removing things to save up on memory or resources, they just hide elements. Put them in the background. Leave them in the background. That's why Flash banners were so CPU heavy. So the same thing with this. I think the Monkey Island 2 demo, someone recently reviewed all of the elements in the Monkey Island 2 demo, and they found unused music that doesn't play in any of the locations, but you can just access it because it's one of the files that was probably available at that time in that version of the game.
Yeah.
So I played some of it to Michael Land and Clint Bajakian to ask them why they removed said music.
Were they able to remember? I'd be surprised.
So Michael had his reasons for removing some of the elements. Usually it was iMuse related because either the music had too many elements, and so it wouldn't fit with the rest of that area. For example, at Woodtick, if you enter a location, then it's supposed to go with the same musical cues as the rest of the locations at Woodtick. So that's why it was removed. Clint Bajakian had different things to say about his locations. He just thought some of the music was just crap.
Yeah, that's funny. I'm surprised people can remember from that far back. People ask me questions from that time, and I have vague feelings about how things were, but I don't really have a lot of specifics about how they went.
It's funny. I can't really understand who remembers more from their time at LucasArts. I mean, you guys had probably the same day-to-day tasks, especially when working on similar games. So how come one person remembers more?
I think some of it's just personality. I mean, my brain is... I have a terrible memory for stuff. I always joke that if I see a movie and 6 months later I can rewatch the movie, and even though I remember the broad strokes of the movie, like most of the details have been pushed out of my brain by other stuff by that point, and that I enjoy seeing all the details again. And so I have terrible memory for movies. I remember that I saw a movie, so the database in my brain remembers which movies I've seen, but it has terrible memory for details, character names, stuff like that. It just, like, I remember them during the movie and for a few weeks afterwards, and then my brain makes room for other things. It defrags or something. I don't know what happens, but it's just the way it works. So my memories are of some things are very strong. I remember very particular things, and then there are some things that I have only really vague impressions of anymore.
Your memory defrags because it's still in the 90s. Nowadays, you don't need to defrag anything. Okay, our next game is Mysteries of the Sith.
Oh, yeah. See, I'm happy now. I think I emulate every game I worked on at LucasArts. So Mysteries of the Sith was one I had to make sure it happened. There she is, Mara Jade.
And again, it's recognized as the GOG version, which it is.
That's because of the Redbook audio.
Multiplayer is not supported. Attempting to select multiplayer options may result in a crash. I love the fact that you added may when it actually results in a crash each and every time.
Okay, well, the thing is, I wasn't quite sure where I'm going to land on that. Like, I don't want it to crash, so I'm hoping to implement enough for it to think that Direct Play, which is the networking system that was used at the time, that it exists, but that there's no network connections. So it will show you, hey, I can't find any network connections to use, but I haven't quite figured out the magic shenanigans to make it do that. So right now it crashes. My goal is to make it, and maybe I'll eventually support multiplayer. That could be, some future thing, but that's a lot of work, and I'm not ready to go there yet. So for now, I'm going to leave that alone. But I'd like it to not crash, so hopefully it won't.
What do you need to do in order to add support for multiplayer?
Well, it depends on what kind of multiplayer. If the game itself talks low-level multiplayer, like Outlaws, then I probably isn't too hard, because I pretty much just need to rebroadcast, packets and accept packets coming in on certain ports. So that's pretty doable. But some games use Direct Play, which had a whole lobby system and a whole bunch of complex stuff, which I'm never going to say never, because I've gone way beyond what I ever thought I would do in most of the stuff for Dream. So it's it's possible I'll implement a whole Direct Play emulation layer and to make that work if I ever go that far. But I'll probably start by just trying to do like basic TCP networking. And so I know like Outlaws can just talk directly to the Windows TCP layer, and if I get that working enough, I think that might be good enough multiplayer for me.
Yeah, but you need to handle the sending and receiving of the packets, because the actual processing of whatever is those packets is done by the game itself.
Yeah, but Direct Play inserts itself in between the game and that, so I don't think it's necessarily, I think it puts its own headers on and does some things, but I may be misremembering. I have only worked on the lowest level stuff, so like I did a lot of the networking for Outlaws, so I know how it works at that level. So that's sort of one advantage that I have there.
Look at that fancy logo.
I know.
That's it. Video demonetized.
Oh yeah, that's true. Can't watch the logo with that.
Actually, my main problem with licensed music is usually in Monkey Island.
Really?
Someone licensed the theme from Monkey Island, from Curse of Monkey Island, and it's not LucasArts. It's some Brazilian company.
Huh.
And so every time I get my video demonetized by whomever.
So yeah, you can see there's separate controls for the CD audio as well. So as you can see, we had a high budget for cutscenes in this game. This was my first and only lead programmer role at LucasArts. I was the lead for this title, and the original Jedi Knight actually had filmed cutscenes with live actors and everything like that. But that's a huge production budget for an add-on, follow-on pack. They decided to try to animate the cutscenes in the engine.
We were pretty forgiving at the time, given the fact that the characters don't even move their mouths.
Yeah.
I'm not even talking about lip syncing. They're just not moving their mouths.
Yeah. There's a bit of jankiness to the models of this time, and it's similar in the original Quake as well. Like the low poly models are just pretty.
It's not something you typically see in an asteroid.
It's one of the best lines, though. It's not it's moving. It's not something you typically see in an asteroid. Of that comment from Mara Jade. But yeah, we thought about it actually shipping it where, like, as you saw, that was the compressed video. So we actually recorded the video of the cutscenes, and we actually originally going to ship it with the cutscenes running in the engine and just run the engine live. But we ran into some troubles, so I can't remember why. We just decided to do that. Yes, thank you. I hate the mouse direction by default in these games. So yeah, this introduced colored lighting, which we overused for sure in the levels. I've seen some people rag on the game a little bit because it was overused, but we had, rather than just lights being monochromatic, we had colored lighting, which is basically just RGB Garou shading on top of the
but it's a thing of beauty. Look at me shooting at the wall, and the wall lights up.
Yeah, so, but it was a bit overused in the game, in the level design for the game. But there's some pretty cool looking levels. It was the same level design team as Outlaws, essentially. I think there might have been a couple adjustments, and I thought the Outlaws levels were always really good. So these guys did a pretty good job on the level design. I don't have an opinion one way or the other on the original levels for Jedi Knight because I only ever played a few of them. You're pretty good with that lightsaber.
Yeah.
I always just try to shoot him with my blaster.
That's it. What?
Yeah, I saw this kind of... Yeah, there's some kind of generator that generates stormtroopers, so if you just keep sitting there, they'll keep generating more and more stormtroopers in this level until you solve the puzzles.
It's a good thing that the stormtroopers are useless in general.
Yeah, it's pretty funny if you look at the stats for some of these early 3D games, just how few polygons they're pushing. You're kind of like, wow, okay.
What is it? Alt-Shift-V?
Yeah. So yeah, a whopping 40 triangles, 80, 130.
Wait, it's running at 30 FPS?
It was capped. So that's one of the complaints that people have about Jedi Knight is it was actually capped at 30 frames per second.
Who capped it? LucasArts?
Yeah, something in the game engine was capping it, and I don't know why. But I've seen some complaints online about running Jedi Knight, and can you uncap it? Can you hack it so that it's not capped at 30 frames per second? You'd have to hack the code though, because it's not something that's limited to Direct 3D or anything. It's something about the way they did things that limits it. So not as smooth as it could be. If you want 60 frames per second, you need to play Shadows of the Empire. That's a Star Wars game at 60 frames per second, because that was designed for Nintendo 64, and it obviously console games are happiest at 60 frames per second.
It's funny, I played Mysteries of the Sith before I played Jedi Knight.
Yeah.
Okay. Next up on our list is not even a game. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I do know what you're talking about.
It's the Star Wars Episode 1 Insider's Guide.
There's another Windows-based thing where they took the Rebel Assault engine, Smush engine, and spiffed it up a little bit, made it run on Windows. And I think it supports 16-bit color for this one, which is kind of a new thing. But it's pretty demanding.
Let's get demonetized.
Yeah, you'll probably have to blank the audio for that section, I think.
As long as you keep it under 10 seconds, it's fine.
Okay. So yeah, but this is released, I think, before the movie?
Before the movie?
It might have been. It was
that
certainly...
doesn't make any sense because you have the actual script of the movie.
Does it have the final script?
Read the script before. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, there was a lot of post-production done, so it still could have come out, during post-production.
Can we have the theatrical poster?
Yep.
Looks like Cinemania. Remember Cinemania?
No.
Cinemania was an application by Microsoft That was the IMDb of the time. So you'd buy every year Cinemania 94, Cinemania 95.
Okay, yeah. The like Expedia, but focus on movies. I think they just used the Expedia engine for it probably and just kind of narrowed the focus. Kind of like this. I mean, there were several. There was the Insider's Guide, and then there's also Star Wars Behind the Magic, which is like the exact same engine, same kind of thing, but it's more about the trilogy as opposed to being focused on episode 1. But this was definitely at a time when multimedia CDs were the thing. I mean, at the time, CDs were common, but giant hard drives weren't. And so they're all designed to be run off the CD specifically. So there's actually, you see the 1s and the 2s next to each thing there. If you click on a 2 item, it's going to ask you to insert disk 2. And there was actually no way to install both disks to your hard drive. And so after a second, they'll say insert disk 2. And you actually have to go to the menus in Dream or use a keyboard shortcut and pick disk 2 to insert.
So I click on Alt-U, and then I choose insert disk 2.
And then say, okay, and I'll find that stuff, and then I'll load the disk 2 content.
Wow, motion control.
So a lot of this stuff was done, with Director and that kind of thing. But I think LucasArts felt like they had, they'd taken the history of it is they'd done Rebel Assault 2, which was the Smush engine, the insane engine that Vince Lee wrote. And then they'd done a thing called Star Wars Making Magic as a bonus thing. And it's a DOS-based multimedia presentation, very much like this, but lower resolution and generated for DOS. And I think that was relatively successful. They bundled that with Yoda Stories on quite a few systems. And of course, that was right at the time Windows was becoming popular as a gaming platform. And so they eventually followed that up with Star Wars Making Magic, which is another multimedia 2-disc extravaganza like this one that used an engine and a version of the Insane engine that was ported to Windows natively and expanded, it looks like, to support a new compression mechanism for 16-bit color and that kind of thing to make it a little more competitive with what was available at the time.
You have information about episode 2 and episode 3, even though they weren't released. So you get information about episode 2 that says that George Lucas began writing the screenplay for the as yet untitled episode 2 in June of 1998, and he will begin principal photography in late spring 2000.
So that kind of puts a time frame for when this was released, because it was obviously before 2000, but after.
Location scouting begins in late 1999.
So clearly in 1999. So it was designed to be released either at the same time as the movie or maybe a little bit before or after to kind of hype the movie.
And it says during filming, the episode 2 crew will use a digital camera, which turned out to be a bad idea. Because nowadays, I think in 4K Blu-ray, the original trilogy looks better than episodes 1 to 3.
Yeah, well, even episode 1 looks better than 2.
Digital camera, you actually cap the resolution, unlike film.
Yeah, even episode 1 looks better than episode 2 in Blu-ray because of 4K, because of they still used film for a lot of the scenes in episode 1.
This was fun. Next up, we have Indiana Jones and his desktop adventures.
It's the first Indiana Jones there. I know it gets confusing. They all have pictures of Indy. You got to know which one was on the box art. Oh yes, this is a personal favorite of mine because I did the Mac port of it. Nobody asked me to do it, but I thought it was kind of a cool concept for a game. It's a bit of a roguelike, if you like to say, in a way, in that it's randomly generated worlds each time. And so the idea was you'd have a game that you could play over and over again because you'll have different quests. It's all the fundamental idea of the quest is always you go find some object, you need to give it to some guy who gives you some other object who gives you some guy, and it dovetails until you get to some boss. So the gameplay is the same each time, but the objects are different and the layout of the worlds is different. So in theory, you can play thousands of different games this way. But nobody asked me to do it for the Mac. And when I looked at the code, I was kind of just in terror of it because it was all written for the Microsoft Foundation classes, MFC, which is... so
you had the same problems you had nowadays with actually porting it for Dream.
Yeah. Well, I don't use any frameworks for Dream. I sell my own code directly to Windows. But
I presume that the problem was that it uses the Windows GUI for everything.
Yeah, so I had to simulate that. So, I don't, for Dream, I don't care that it used this library. What I do care is that they ultimately called down to Windows to, create menu bars and widgets and scroll bars and animate all this, in a window. And so I had to implement a ton of stuff so that you could click on the menus and show the dialogues and the controls and that, all this stuff worked. One of the hardest things was actually drawing circles. So they use that little circle control in there, and Windows has a pretty complicated arc drawing command that lets you draw fragments of circles and segments and stuff. And in theory, drawing a circle is easy, but it's actually not as easy as you might think, because you have to fill it in and you have to do some crazy math and handle thick lines and that kind of thing. And so to make that all work and look pretty good, it's still not pixel exact to what you would get on Windows, but it's pretty close enough for video gaming for sure.
Right. So on the Mac, does it look like the Windows pop-ups, or does it have
No, It's all native controls on the Mac. So on the Mac, you'd use the Mac menu bar. It would use Mac scroll bars. I use all the Mac drawing. The screen where you're running around looks identical, but that's the only thing. I use Mac cursors, and all the widgets and everything would be the Mac native, because at the time I was very much a Mac, fanatic, and I wanted to adhere to the Mac programming and user interface guidelines, and so the game did that. See, on the Mac at the time, they had something called desk accessories, which were sort of designed for casual games or useful little utilities. And so I actually always thought that this would work well as a desk accessory style game, because it runs in a small window and is sort of a short game, though the games can get pretty long if you don't change the game the world size. But yeah, so the port to the Mac was quite complicated. But for Dream, it was complicated in a totally different reason, which is that I needed to implement all this. But like I said, when I did this, it benefited Infernal Machine and other things that actually use Windows GUI controls as well. So in the end, the work was worth it. And this is just a fun game.
It's funny that a game that is 1 megabyte in size was released in 1996.
It was released on floppy disk even. At the time, everything was CD based. It was released on floppy disk, and it didn't come in a big fat box. It came in like a thin flat pack with just one floppy tucked in to it as a totally different form. It was obviously designed to be sold differently. In fact, I seem to remember they were talking about selling it. It was sold at a low price point too. I think it was like $20 or something like that. And it was designed to be sold in different locations than just gaming stores. They wanted to put it, everywhere. And then they followed up this.
$20 isn't cheap.
Yeah, it was cheap compared to your $40, $50 A+ games. So
yeah, but when adjusted for inflation, then it's true. $40 nowadays. Would you pay $40 for this game nowadays?
No, not these days.
$5.
And these days, it'd probably work well as a mobile game, honestly.
Yeah.
But they did they did another game on the same engine called Yoda Stories, which is basically the exact same game, except... Oh, okay, well, you can demonstrate it first. But do you have it installed already? Yeah. Demonetization.
That's it. Demonetized.
Oh, now you're really playing with fire. So they made a few upgrades to this game. The big change that they made here, and in fact, I got Yoda Stories working before Indie Desktop, and that was because, at least in Dream, and that was because this is a 32-bit Windows program, like all the other programs I've worked on. So, Curse of Monkey Island, all the 3D games, those are all 32-bit Windows programs. They were written for Windows 95. Indie Desktop was actually written to run on Windows 3.1, and so it's a 16-bit Windows app. And as you know, you can't even run 16-bit Windows apps anymore on a 64-bit system. They just said, yeah, we're not even going to bother to let you run that. And so that actually motivated me more to want to get a 16-bit app running, because I'm like, well, this is even harder to run on a modern system than Yoda Stories was. And so I put a lot of effort into trying getting 16-bit apps running. And,
so you'd think that once you added support for Yoda Stories, then Indie's Desktop Adventure would be a walk in the park, but it seems like it wasn't.
It was a ton of work, actually, to get Indie Desktop running. Even though they ultimately called the same things, I had to translate them all between 16-bit and 32-bit. So it was very much I sort of have a 16-bit compatibility layer running on top of Windows to run Indie Desktop, running on top of my 32-bit Windows layer. But for Yoda Stories, it's all running native 32-bit, so that's kind of nice. But it's also interesting for any desktop because Yoda Stories just uses WAV files. So the opening theme is played it's a big sample, and all the sounds are sampled. But Indie Desktop actually plays the theme through the General MIDI controller on Windows. And so I had to figure out how to adapt Windows General MIDI controller for Indie Desktop to play through my MIDI system.
Wait, was that the first game that you added support for that had General MIDI for Windows?
For Windows, yeah. I think that's the only game that I have that has General MIDI Windows support. Oh, except for my ports. I also had support. So as you know, I did in around 2000, I did ports of some of the Scum games to Windows, which are hard to find, but they do exist out there. And you can run those in DREAMM now. And so it's actually it's emulating Windows and running my Windows ports of the Scum games. You can't really tell the difference too much, except that features like the aspect ratio correction and stuff are running in the game rather than in DREAMM. So DREAMM isn't doing any of the aspect ratio correction. It's the original aspect ratio correction from the Windows port of the game. But apart from that,
they may be hard to find. They may be hard to find, but a lot of the people I interviewed are credited on the Windows version of Full Throttle, for example.
Oh, yeah.
And sometimes they even get different credits. And I never understood that. What happened with this Windows port?
Yeah, so, I mean, I did the Windows port in like 2000, and then a lot of people worked to figure out how to sell it because it was done at a time when the motivation for doing the ports in the first place was that they wanted to release some of the games in online forms. They wanted to release, say, Full Throttle online. Now, this was a big problem because Full Throttle is, a 400 megabyte game. And at the time, most people were still on dial-up. So downloading 400 megabytes over dial-up was completely out of the question. Even if you compressed it, it wasn't that much smaller. It was still like 250 to 300 megabytes, I think, compressed. Because most of it's audio data, which does not compress very well. And the movie data, which also does not compress very well. And so they were trying to figure out how to do that. And they knew they wanted to run it on Windows because, downloading stuff for DOS and running it, big games like that was even more tricky. So they said, well, let's do it for Windows. And I had proposed to them, hey, if you ever want a Windows port, I'd be the guy to do it. And so they eventually came back to me and said, okay, yeah, let's do it. And so they really wanted Full Throttle. They actually didn't ask me for any of the other games at the time. Or maybe they asked me for one or two other games, but really they cared about Full Throttle.
Maybe because they were working on the sequel at the time.
Yeah, I think so. I think they were prepping this idea that they'd have an online release of the original Full Throttle as sort of a bonus add-on that they'd make available for people. And so I actually did a lot of work, not just on Full Throttle, the engine running it there, but also figuring out how to maybe more aggressively compress the audio and video data to make it fit in an online thing. And I think we got it down to almost as low as 100 megs at one point.
150.
And so
that's what he said last time. And that's why I told Dan Connors in my conversation with him that you said.
Oh, yeah. Actually, Dan's is one of the ones I haven't actually gone back and watched. And I did want to, if you talk to him about that, I want to go hear what he said about the Full Throttle stuff.
I talked to him about you.
Yeah. No, Dan was the guy. I remember he was the one who was trying to put together the Full Throttle stuff. So I'm glad you talked to him about it. So he probably has more details because he knew what was going on in the company. I was just an external guy, and they kept asking me for can you make it smaller? Can you make it smaller? And I'm like, I'm trying. I tried every different audio compression mechanism I could come up with, and it probably sounded terrible. I mean, but had to make it good enough for release for an online version. But yes, you can run my versions of the games now and the thing, and they use the GMIDI for the Salmon Max and the Day of the Tentacle versions that I released, and the Fate of Atlantis version I released. Those all got releases in Europe, only certain countries. And so you can run my versions in Windows, and they also use the MIDI engine through Windows to play their MIDI files.
Okay. Moving on to...
Still got more games.
The Japanese version of Fate of Atlantis.
Oh, yes. This was a surprise to turn up. I'd heard rumors that it existed, but hadn't seen evidence of its real existence until pretty recently. So far, you can't tell.
1995.
There you go. There's your first evidence that it's Japanese. And it's interesting, this version, because there's a second Japanese version of Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis for the FM Towns, which is not DOS-based. And it was a completely different port. It was done completely differently. The FM Towns had the ability to overlay an extra screen's worth of graphics at double the resolution at 640 by 480. And so all the kanji was nice, crisp, high-resolution graphics overlaid on top of the gameplay. But this version for DOS had no such luxury, and so it has to make the kanji work in very low resolutions. And so it's definitely cruder, and as you'll see when you get to the actual gameplay, they had to change the interface, the verbs and everything completely from a normal release.
Yeah.
So the inventory is along the bottom, and the kanji verbs are in the upper row. I can't read Japanese, so I have no idea what it says, so you'll just have to guess your way through it, I guess.
Actually, you know what? Yeah, the keyboard shortcuts are the same, so I can play through the game without knowing.
So I had heard from somebody, and I can't confirm it, that apparently this interface is based off of a version that was done for, I want to say, the Sega Genesis, or whatever the Sega platform was at the time. Apparently there was a Sega port of Fate of Atlantis, or of a game, another Scum game of this era, and that the interface style is based off of that. So this wasn't the first port to use this kind of interface. You must know your Fate of Atlantis well to get this far without knowing what you're doing.
I'm clicking the push button, so...
The way looks blocked.
Okay.
And they just used the English voices and treated it as subtitles. And you were telling me earlier that this is a later release. It was released a few years after the original.
Yeah, even in the beginning, you saw the copyright. It was 1992, which was the original, and 1995, which is this release.
Oh, okay. So I think this was officially released for DOS V, which is like a specific Japanese version of MS-DOS. But as far as I know, it's until the Dig, I think it's the only Scum DOS game that was released in Japanese. I don't think they did Japanese. No, I don't think they did a Japanese Full Throttle. So I think the Dig, and then of course, I don't think they did a Japanese Curse of Monkey Island either. Or at least I haven't found one yet. I know they did for Curse. They did a Chinese release and they did a Korean release. And for the Dig, they did a Japanese version of the Dig, but only the Windows version was released. And it wasn't my Windows version. It was a Windows version that was done in-house at the time by Matt Russell, I believe, was the programmer who did, because he was our Windows programmer for a while in the early days when I was doing all the Mac ports. He was like assigned to like get Insane ported to Windows 95 and do like the Windows 95 version of Full Throttle and Windows 95 version of the Dig, like the early ones. And then I don't. So remember.
I presume that this was done in-house. The changes to the interface.
Yeah, I don't know the interface. The interface is pretty flexibly. I don't know that you did. I know some Scum experts I could ask, but the interface was actually programmed in Scum, and I think there was a lot of flexibility for what you could do there. But the support for the different fonts and for rendering the Japanese fonts was definitely specific to this version. Because I remember talking to Eric Womander about him adding support in Scum for the CJK languages, as we called them, which is Chinese, Japanese, and Korean. I'm learning interesting things about the various character sets there and how they what we needed to do to support them.
Yeah, unlike the Hebrew version of Loom, where they actually hacked the files.
Yeah, that was a total hack. No offense to the Hebrew version of Loom, but it was definitely a hack. Clever. I appreciate a good hack.
I asked Eric if it was an official release, because once I figured out it was a hack, then I wanted to know if it was actually licensed properly by Lucasfilm. And he said that it was. They just didn't have the manpower to handle the actual translation or changes in Scum. So what they had to do was hack the files, change the font, and make sure that the text was always shorter than the English version, so that the layout will fit.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, mostly official releases aren't hacked, but there's a few cases where that has happened. At least one case where some inappropriate language was removed from a file that had leaked out into the unofficial release, and they just hacked it out of the file rather than re-release it. Because if you have to recompile the code, then you risk something that the compiler generated a slightly different code or created some incompatibility that you weren't anticipating. So to save the testing burden, it was easier to just like overwrite the inappropriate language of spaces or something. So that it didn't.
Oh, great. Good night, folks.
Are there speedruns for this game? I've never done the... I know there's people love doing speedruns.
There are speedruns for this game, and there are speedruns for all of the LucasArts adventure games.
I'll have to go look. I haven't checked out the speedrunners.
So, speaking of speedrunners, do you plan to add any speedrunning features to Dream in the near future?
I think we talked about this on our last conversation. Did we?
Yep, we have.
I haven't thought about it since, so no, I haven't.
But things changed in the past 8 months, so I had to ask again.
Yeah, no, I haven't put any more thought into it. But if somebody was, reached out and said, hey, we'd love to use your platform for speedrunning, I'd be incentivized to do it. A lot of times it's responsive to requests, when people say, hey, there's this game Infernal Machine, that I'd love to see running. And then, I think, I never even heard of that game before, which honestly I hadn't. That was how in the
really?
Not in the
how
not in,
come?
That was how not in the know I was after I left.
LucasArts.
But it didn't come out. It came out after I left, about 3 years after I left.
Yeah, but you worked with LucasArts around the same time on the Windows ports.
Yeah, but I was only focusing on the Scum games. But yeah, I just wasn't paying much attention. As I've told you in the past, or I've told many people in the past, I'm just not a gamer. I love figuring out how games work, and I like the figuring out programming of games and interacting with the systems that are needed to make games work. But in terms of actually playing the games, I'm not only not very good at them, but I frustrate easily, and I just don't have the time or thoughts to do it. So I'm not in the market for buying games. So I'm not really studying the games industry that much, especially once I left games in '98. I kind of, moved on to focus on emulation and operating system level stuff. So it just wasn't like, it's an interest for me from a technical point of view, but just not something I play a lot of. My son plays games all the time. He's probably disappointed. Actually, he probably doesn't care now. He's 12. But at the time, when he was younger, he probably was disappointed that Dad didn't really want to play games or didn't know that much about games. But
even though he worked on games.
Yes, even though I worked on games. I blew his mind the other day because I told him that I flirted with the idea of joining Bungie shortly before they got bought out by Microsoft and did Halo, and he's like, "You could have worked on Halo," and I'm like, "It's possible." I mean, I talked to those guys several times during my career, and this, when I was into the games industry, because I was pretty well known as the Mac game programmer, and they were Mac focused people when they started out, and we're happy to get more Mac people on, but I never signed up with them, decided to work with them. So what could have been, I could have been, probably would have dragged me fully into the games industry for even longer if I'd been with them, though I would have ended up at Microsoft like I ended up at Microsoft anyway. So it's kind of funny how you look at that.
I think out of all of the people I've interviewed, Hal Barwood, surprisingly, Hal Barwood is the only one who actually played games back then and still plays games nowadays.
Huh.
I mean, he was excited about the fact that he can play Infernal Machine.
Yeah, well, I hope he gave it a try.
I'll get him again and I'll ask him. I have a new series. Called Text Play, in which I bring back all of the people I interviewed and I play one of the games that they worked on. So it's similar to what we're doing right now with Dream, but we're actually playing just one game. So I brought in David Fox and we played Zach McCracken. And I brought in Bill Taylor and we played Curse of Monkey Island. And I brought in Brad Taylor and we played Moonbase Commander. Do you know Moonbase Commander?
I've heard of it. Isn't that like a non-adventure game that's built on the Scum engine, right?
Yeah, it's a strategy game built on the Scum engine. Mind blowing.
Yeah.
So maybe I'll get Hal and we'll play Infernal Machine.
People have asked me if I wanted to support the Humongous games because, I did the Scum games. And, And on the one hand, that seems like it'd be another set of DOS games that I could probably pretty easily add. Though I know they did Windows versions later on in the time frame and stuff. But on the other hand, I'm like, those are pretty well covered by ScumVM, and I worry because there's already dealing with just the explosion of versions of games for LucasArts, and I don't know whether Humongous did the same thing and they had an explosion of versions of every game to track down and support. But it's just a lot of bookkeeping work that's and they have a lot of games, so I think adding that would triple the number of games that I support if I went and added support for their games. And on top of that, I'd have to deal with all the different versions and stuff like that. So it kind of intimidates me as a thought. So I generally tell people, no, I'm not that interested in supporting the Humongous games, but I will dabble in, like I said, LucasArts adjacent stuff. So, I'll never say never on anything at this point, but I think it's more likely.
LucasArts aside, I presume that there are games that you can't play nowadays on modern systems that you'd like to play, even though you're not a gamer.
Yeah. There are some games of the time. Well, I have to say, most of the games that I'd really like to see and play are games that I thought looked cool at the time, but just never got into, or there were games that were fun at the time, but I never really spent the time getting to play. So, for example, like at the time I was at LucasArts, people were big into Descent, and that was always a cool game. I sucked at that game. I have no 3D spatial sense, and so it was fun to run around the corridors. But as soon as the timer started going off, and I was, had to get out of the mine before it exploded, I just give up because I would just die because I could never find my way out of the maze of things. But it was one of those games that was always super cool. And Diablo, the original Diablo, I thought was a cool game that I never got a chance to really play, and I'm sure that's probably not a super easy thing to get running on modern systems either. So, there are a few games like from that era.
Have you played Dune?
No, I'm a huge Dune fan though. So like from Dune world, like the Dune books and the movies, and so I'm steeped in Dune, but I've never played the Dune game.
Did you watch the latest movie?
Of course.
Did you like it?
Yeah, I did. I'm very much looking forward to the second half, and I really do hope that he gets to do the third part, which will be Dune Messiah, which I think would be a great thing. The frustrating thing is I've read all the Dune books, even the much maligned, ones by his son, and the later books are really trippy, and I would love to see somebody adapt them. But everybody wants to start with Dune, and they'll only get so far, and then interest will peter out, or they'll move on to other things. And like nobody will ever do movie versions of books 4 through 6 unless somebody starts there. And so like I kind of hope, I have this like vague hope that like Villeneuve will like make it through like at least Dune Messiah, and then like maybe somebody will move on. Like the Sci-Fi Channel did an adaptation of Children of Dune, which was sort of a combination of Dune Messiah and Children of Dune. And I liked that well enough. Sometimes it felt a little more like a stage play version of Dune more so than a big budget, super intense version. But I liked a lot of it. But I liked it for what it was, and I accept it for what it was. But so I'm happy that at least somebody went at least through Children of Dune. But like to go on to the craziness of God Emperor of Dune, which is just a lot of crazy stuff happens in that one, and then to even move beyond that to do like Heretics or Chapter House, and those are pretty nuts books, and they're pretty detached from the first set of books as well. So I think that'd be great to see somebody try some of those, but I feel like it'll never happen because people always want to start with their vision. They want to stamp their vision on the first book, and they'd have to make it through 3 other books of very dense, intense stuff to get to the 4th one. I don't think anybody would ever start with like book 4 and just say, I'm going to screw it. I just want to make this crazy version of God Emperor of Dune, and I'll have to try and explain how we got here.
Yeah, but it's quite possible that they'll do it because nowadays, people don't go to the theaters.
Yeah.
They'd rather binge watch series on Netflix instead of going to the movies because the movies no longer feel special. So that's why movies nowadays are much longer than they used to be, because they have to, leave a lasting impression. Unlike, you no longer have rom-coms, you no longer have 90-minute movies.
Yeah.
Not in the theaters, at least. You have them on Netflix but maybe in order to get people to the theaters, they'll make a 5-hour movie that will include book 4.
I think it'd have to be longer than that if you want to include that much.
Well, he's taking his time because the first movie, I think, is half the material that was covered in the original 1984 movie. So
that's half the book. So yeah. So if he does book part 2 out in a month or two, a couple months, and that'll be the rest of the first book. And I hope he gets to do at least the third movie, which would be the second book, Dune Messiah.
And speaking of movies, I see that you have a poster of The Abyss in the background over there. Have you watched the 4K release?
Yes, they released it one night only. The Abyss is one of my all-time favorite movies. I recognize that it has its flaws, but for my money, I think I saw it at a good time, and I'm a huge Jim Cameron fan, and The Abyss to me was like the quintessential movie I love so much about The Abyss. And it was a chance to see it in the theater, a chance to bring my son so he can drag my son to watch it with me in the theater. So he got to see it on the night for what was a one night only thing in 4K. Then he released, and they're finally going to release it on 4K Blu-ray, which I'm happy about because the previous release was like 25 years ago on DVD, and it wasn't even an anamorphic release. It was just like straight, it's a 2.35 to 1 movie. Oh, maybe it's 1.85 to 1, but either way, it's 2.35 to 1. So you have the black bars, but because it's not anamorphic, those black bars are taking up actual encoding space of your screen. So you don't even have 480p. It's more like 360p or something like that of lines of resolution. I was just like, I can't even stand to watch it. I have the Blu-ray and the old DVD. I mean, I can't even stand to watch it anymore because it's just so terrible. So I'm excited to see a quality release. So I was excited about the re-release, and they gave out free posters at the movie theater for people who showed up. So I'm happy to have.
Well, luckily it was an actual remaster or an actual 4K remaster, because True Lies, which is also by Jim Cameron, had an AI upscale for the 4K remaster. So it looks horrible. That's too bad. Because with the AI upscale, the first thing that happens, first of all, you have the uncanny valley effect because everyone looks drawn. And you got things in the foreground and things in the background. But one of the problems with AI upscaling is that it thinks that things in the background are just too blurry because of the quality of the image. So everything is in focus in every frame. It looks weird.
That does sound weird. Yeah, I would say that the quality of the Abyss transfer was really good. There's only one scene that I noticed at the end where it looked either upscaled or they I don't know, for some reason it was jarring. Even my son was like, "Dad, did you see that one scene at the end? It was like really low quality compared to the rest of the movie." And I was like, "Yeah, I saw that too." So I think it was part of the special edition, so like extensions, and I hope that when they do the release on Blu-ray that they include both versions, because even though there are a lot of positive things about the special edition, it's another case where sometimes the theatrical version has its own charms and it preserves a lot more of the mystery, and it's a little less over the top with I wasn't bothered as much by it seeing it this time. A little less of the Cold War, threats of nuclear annihilation, which, pervade all of Cameron's movies from the 80s, as they should. And, I was watching a good documentary series about the movies from the 80s, and the Cold War being in the background of all the 80s movies. It's just part of the 80s, movie. If you have an 80s movie, you just kind of have to accept that it's there. It's in the background, no matter what you do. It's kind of a weird situation to think that we all lived through that.
James Bond had to fight through that throughout the 80s.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay.
Did we get through all the games, or is there any more you wanted to look at today? Mortimer.
We have Mortimer, which is Rebel Assault for kids.
Basically, yes. So here you get the launcher. That's another reason why I had to add the Windows widget support. I took all my inspiration from Windows 2000, by the way, which I think is the best looking of the classic Windows. It's got see the gradient on the title bar there? I even mimicked that. That was a Windows 2000 special.
So let's play. Oh, okay. Your game.
You have to pick your kid and...
Wow, you added the actual sound effects from Windows.
Yeah. Hope I don't get in trouble over that.
Yeah, you probably will.
I can always replace them later. I'm going to wait to... I'm asking for forgiveness rather than permission on that one. They're just too iconic.
Look at those fancy animations.
So this is 640 by 480, which at the time, the Insane engine had never been. This is before Curse of Monkey Island, so it had never been used for 640 by 480 video. So there was a lot of work to get the quality of the video up to snuff for this game.
Who might interfere with nature? Hey, where are you going? I'm not waiting for you, Sid. You think about everything too much.
Professor Laszlo, where did you dig these kids up?
Fly you? I'll go.
Sid?
Are you skipping through?
Yeah, I'm skipping through.
Okay, good. I was hoping it wasn't glitching because I can't see your hand. So I'm like, I might have skipped through those, but I hope that you're just not jumping frames there. So you have to play, after we're done at least, you have to play the theme song because it is the catchiest theme song ever and it needs to be in your head.
I mean, this is exactly like the gameplay in Rebel Assault 2. And it came out around the same time because Rebel Assault 2 came out in late 1995 and this one came out in 1996.
Yeah, though this does have, at the end of each level, you have to answer some riddles by the animals to solve the puzzles. So there's a whole interactive section that's actually not like anything in Rebel Assault 2. I'm
sure it was very hard to develop a trivia question that appears and you have options to choose from.
Yeah, well, it's got its whole fancy screen, and it's very, very interactive and kid focused. But
it's quite a programming challenge. I'm talking about the development, not the actual experience the player has.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Vince had added a lot of stuff. I mean, if you notice, like a lot of the launchers of the day, like Rebel Assault had its own launcher, but that was all written using the Insane engine as well. So they did basically created GUI controls and that kind of thing within Insane in order to do that kind of stuff. And so I think Mortimer kind of leveraged that as well. But yeah, I mean, it's not a sophisticated game, but it was kind of cute for its time. But it's super obscure. Very few people know about this game. It must not have sold particularly well.
I was sure that everyone knows about it.
No, if you talk to most Lucas aficionados, they'll be like, "What? What's that game? I've never heard of it."
It was on the cover of the adventure I had.
But very few people have played it. And it was an interesting thing to get up and running because of the whole fact that they had the front end there.
Wait, so you wanted us to hear the theme song?
Yeah, you can just type Q to quit out of the game.
But I can restart the game.
You could if you want to. Oh, but to get the theme song, you need to go play Mortimer and then view. Oh, you can't play the Mortimer movie. Oh yeah, because you gotta wait a while for the theme song. You skipped over the theme song.
Okay, so now I can skip this and we'll hear the theme song.
I think you should skip this one here.
And this one?
Yeah, you gotta get to the screen where the Mortimer's flying.
In 3D?
Yeah. The next one. One more. Okay, there you go. I don't know if this plays the whole theme song, though. No, this isn't the whole theme song. So they actually, there's actually a full credits. Oh, I know what you did. This is from the launcher. You have to go to the launcher and play it from there. So you do want to restart the game. And say, view high score and credits. Click the button. So now you get the full theme song, which was, they actually hired a band to do it. And, for a kid's throwaway, on Rails game, it's quite well done and it's super catchy. They even tried to sync up the animations and everything to the music.
Let me turn up the volume. This is a banger.
It's a banger, man.
Steve Purcell.
Oh, yeah. You should have asked Steve Purcell about Mortimer.
I did.
Oh, you did? Okay. I didn't. That's another one I didn't get through yet. There's so many hours of interviews. It's hard to get through them all.
It's 65 hours. I calculated the grand total of all of my 2023 interviews. 65 hours.
Well, I have the full theme song. I did a capture of the full theme song playing in Dream and put it up on YouTube. So if you want to see the full thing, you can go to my YouTube channel and find it there.
So you talked about, in our last conversation, or the first conversation, you talked about the fact that you had to work hard on the Outlaws intro in order to sync the shovel to the animation. And they synced the entire theme song to the theme song.
Yeah, but the thing is, most of the theme song can be off, except for, so you'll notice that it's only at the very beginning where they show the close-ups of like the hands and the drums. Mm-hmm. So like for the first 30 seconds or so, you're probably good. Even if you're starting to drift out of sync, you won't notice it that much. And the rest of the thing is not shown in that much detail because I think on some systems it did drift a bit. And so this is before, I'm pretty sure this is before I put in my new system to time everything off the audio. And so you were relying on the audio clock syncing with the system clock, which is really the problem. And when I redid it for Outlaws, I changed it so that all the timing in the game was done all the timing in the video, when it was playing videos, all the timing was done off the audio clock so that you couldn't get out of sync because the video was timed to the audio.
Okay, so I had the adventure with Mortimer, which is this one.
There you go.
Summer 95. I got it with either the Dig or Rebel Assault 2.
Mm-hmm.
Because I had this one and this one. And I think you know where this is going.
I think I know.
We've got the Outlaws adventure. And if we flip through this entire thing, we get to Lucas Who.
Look at that young, fresh face.
Yeah. Senior programmer and Mac magician. Can I test you on the answers? See if you still remember that.
Sure. I'll look away so I don't see anything.
Okay. When did you start at LucasArts and what was the first project you worked on?
That was the beginning of 1995. And I worked on Dark Forces and Full Throttle first.
Mostly well played. And what was your best LucasArts war story?
Oh, which one did I pick for that one? Probably that was the one where in Dark Forces you kept falling out of the world. And yep. When we went to higher resolutions.
And if you could transport yourself into a LucasArts game, which would it be?
I don't know what one I would have said back then. That one I can't remember. Try something. Oh, what would I have said?
Just think, it's something that came around the same time. They probably told you to say that.
No, I don't think they did, but was it Full Throttle?
No, it was the Dig.
It was the Dig. Oh, yeah, that's true. That makes sense.
Probably the Dig. I think it would be exciting to have a chance to explore an alien world and make first contact with an ancient civilization despite the obvious dangers.
That's pretty funny.
You're so diplomatic.
I know. Well, I actually had gotten pretty diplomatic. The thing was, when I first started, there was a lot of attention on my hiring because the Mac users were so desperate for games. And Apple had done a big push to announce the Game Sprockets, which was their new gaming API at the time. And they were going to do a new thing to game. They do this every few years where they're like, yeah, we're going to really do games well this time. And they do it for a few months and then they kind of realize that it's harder than they think. And then they let it go to the wayside and don't care about it for a few years. And then, so this is, they were really pushing it, and I was doing AMA style things. Of course, we didn't have AMA, we didn't have Reddit, but it's basically a similar thing to the Reddit AMA. I did a few BBS, like AOL chats. That's what I did. It was an AOL chat, so where I was live, being asked questions and that kind of thing. And so I realized pretty quickly that I had to be careful with my responses and very, very measured. I knew I was working for a company that had like a lot of the spotlight on it. I was doing I was working on a Star Wars game. I eventually, got to see a early cut of episode 1 before it released, and like all those things. I knew I had to be like super careful about what I said. So I was very much in button down diplomatic mode.
And okay, now you can look at the answers. If you hadn't chosen a career in gaming, what would you be doing? I'd definitely still be doing programming, most likely working on bleeding edge internet applications for the Mac.
Yep. It's that must be before I found emulation, because that's definitely, I would have mentioned emulation then if I had discovered it by then. But this was right before then.
Okay. So now we're going to play the last game.
You mean the best game, right?
I mean the best game, the last game, and the best game. Where do I have it?
It begins with
I know, I can click the button. Okay, here it is.
This is an iconic, and this is one of the most iconic opening videos of any game that LucasArts did, or any game of the era, honestly. But it's long, so you probably don't want to watch the whole thing on your just talk with me.
We can watch the whole thing while talking.
There you go. The 1138 reference, of course.
Yeah, 1138. Well done. So I talked to Charlie Ramos a while ago. That conversation hasn't premiered yet, but we talked about this game on which he worked extensively. And
was he one of the artists?
The intro.
Yeah, we had some good voice acting for this too. This is right at the height of voice acting. We had the guy who plays Q on Star Trek, John Delancey. He's the evil doctor in this one. That was a big get, I remember at the time.
So the interesting thing is that people keep saying that, certain games had better voice acting. But I always felt that LucasArts always had great voice acting, given that it was a subsidiary of Lucasfilm, so they knew what they were doing.
Yeah, but I don't think we got much help from Lucasfilm in that regard. So I think it was the voice acting part of this was all done in-house. We had Colette and a couple other folks who were in charge of the voice acting, and they went out and did their own talent scouting and production and everything like that. Was independent of Lucasfilm. I mean, as far as I know, you should talk to those folks, but they built it all up from scratch, as far as I understand, for the voice. It was a different kind of voice acting, obviously, because it was more akin to voice acting for like animated shows and that kind of thing. And so I don't know how much at the time Lucasfilm was not doing a lot of that kind of stuff. But yeah, these credits are awesome. I think they got in trouble though for spending so much money on the credits. I think way too much work went into the credits, and people were like, "Yeah, they're awesome," but that cost way over budget, as far as I understand.
Music by Clint Bajakian.
With the twang, right? Is his so there's some interesting sync-ups that happen. Oh, and I missed Steve Shaw's credit. He was the lead programmer, and he and I to this day are still very good friends. So we talk pretty frequently.
Really? I plan to talk to him in 2024.
I told him he should talk to you. So hopefully he'll accept your thing. You should get Darren too. He'd be an interesting guy to talk to.
Well, I haven't reached out to him yet, but I will reach out to him in 2024 and we'll talk. And then I'll get him on Tix Play to play Outlaws.
Yes, or Dark Forces. I mean, he was the program, not the programmer, the game designer for Dark Forces. No one had to do it.
I have a confession to make about Outlaws. Back in the day, I didn't play it when it came out. I think I played it around 2000, then again around 2003, and then it stopped working on modern machines. And then, when you added support for it, I started playing it nonstop. So thanks for that.
It's a great game. I feel like the level designers did an awesome job in this game.
They have.
Looks like you're playing with Direct 3D.
And the secondary fire is so much fun.
Yes. There's a lot of fun things in the game, like dynamite and other things that you can get that, are interesting. This was the first Windows game or DOS game I was a programmer on, not just doing the port of. I actually was working on the Mac port at the time, and I had the Mac port running quite well, but marketing guys decided that it wasn't viable, it wasn't worth spending time to bring to market, so there was never a Mac Outlaws port that saw the light of day. But I certainly played it extensively. I did all the interface at the bottom, the heads-up display, and the weapon system. Those were all things that I ended up working on. And the UI overlays, and I did the 3D. Steve Ash did most of the 3D programming because it's based off the Dark Forces engine. He added like slopes and stuff, which wasn't in the original Dark Forces engine. But I did the 3D API support for things like Glide and Direct 3D. Steve Ash did the some of the work to convert, what he was rendering into primitives that I could then feed to the 3D systems. But I did like all the work for, supporting 3DFX Glide at the time and Direct 3D and getting all that stuff working. So if you're using the Direct 3D version, that's there. The thing I cannot remember for the life of me is in 3D, when you're using the 3D engine, it doesn't display. There's like a nice kind of gold inlay that sits underneath the heads-up display at the bottom that we don't show for some reason on the 3D version. I cannot remember for the life of me why not. I think it might have had to do with the fact that
maybe
the maximum
layering?
Texture. I think the maximum texture size was 256 by 256, and to display the whole overlay would have required stitching multiple renderings together because the width of the screen is 640 by 480, so you can't get a 256 by 256 texture to do the whole thing. We didn't want to do a crappy low-res version. And so we ended up, I think we just punted on it and said you just can't show the gold inlay at the bottom. But I have a regret about that one. I kind of wish that we'd figured out a way to make that work. But I'm sure it was just a time thing. They didn't want, the support for 3D cards was just coming, and we thought it would be a nice addition, but it was never a big deal because once a game ships, you're always moving on to the next game, at least from a company perspective. So support for older games was always fairly limited. And so they weren't going to let me spend a lot of time, apart from minimal on this. The other reason we did this port was because we had the handful of missions, which was like an add-on pack for Outlaws.
Yeah, exactly. And you were about to sell it, but eventually you gave it out for free.
Yeah, I think they were going to do it as an expansion pack, like for the flight sims, where you could add, they'd sell it for, $10, $20 or whatever. And then they eventually ended up giving it out for free, and along with the 2.0 Outlaws upgrade, which included the support for 3D. So
why did you hand it out for free? Was the game not successful?
I think it was a lower selling game, and I think they thought that because to release something for free takes less effort because you don't have to design the packaging, you don't have to market it, you don't have to. There's a lot of costs that associate. You don't have to press the CDs or anything like that, especially. So I think. The
cheaper to release something for free than actually selling it?
Well, if you don't think you're going to make the money back, then yeah, it ends up being that way. So I think they just did the equation. Sure, somebody in finance put the marketing budget together on a spreadsheet, and the numbers didn't come out good. And they're like, you know what? We've done the work. At least they let us release it. I mean, these days, everybody just puts it in the bin and takes the tax write-off. So I was kind of glad that they didn't do that with the work that went into the missions and the 3D work here, so I'm glad it saw the light of day at least.
I should talk to whoever worked at finance at the time.
Yeah, I should. Or Mary Beer, who worked in, she was our marketing head for quite a number of years. She'd probably have some interesting stories.
I'll eventually get to talk to the people who worked at the hint line.
Well, you should talk to Tabitha Toasty if she probably has some great stories to tell. She was one of the main hintline people for a long time.
Chris Brown. Do you know Chris Brown?
Yeah, I remember her. Did you talk to Brett Toasty?
Nope.
Oh, okay. He was one of the producers. I thought he was in the list of people you talked to.
Dr. Brett Mogalewski.
Yeah. Well, Brett and I shared an office for when he first started.
You and Brett Mogalewski?
Yeah. He sat behind me. We were there, and we had one because they were doubling us up. We were growing too fast for the office space we had, so they had to double us up. So for a while, I was in there with him, and then when I worked on Outlaws, I got moved over to office with Rich Fife, who was one of the other
and at the time he worked on Grim Fandango.
Who did? Rich? Or
no,
Brett
Mikulewski.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I remember him working on that. In fact, trying to figure it out. And I certainly had my opinions at the time about, like, I was in Eric's camp that he should have used Scum for a while, but I think eventually he proved his choice to be a wise one for what he did. It was a lot of work to switch to a new programming language, but having one that's not in-house has its own benefits. So having one that was developed, Lua, an existing programming language that has, you don't have to develop your own training for a lot of stuff because it's sort of, you can just point them to existing documentation and stuff on things like that.
Yeah, I mean, it was a huge risk to create an adventure game in a newly developed engine and have it be a good game and a successful game. But eventually, Grim Fandango proved to be... I'm not sure if it was successful in real time. It was eventually successful, I think.
Yeah, certainly critically successful.
Yeah.
But I mean, Tim tends to have that touch on most of the things he develops. So he's got a good design sense for...
Escape from Monkey Island made us all aware that maybe it was a one-off, the whole adventure game in 3D, and it fit the Grim Fandango lore, and it doesn't work in any other type of game or in the Monkey Island franchise.
Yeah, I have my mixed feelings about it for sure. I think if those games had given up on the tank controls, I still feel the tank controls were a huge mistake. That if they had kept a point and click interface, which I felt could have been done because they were fixed cameras, so you could map to that, and then obviously you just have to add the player characters on top of that. What you were doing, I think that could have worked in a similar way to Scum, but so that always makes me frustrated trying to use the tank controls for the games.
But you have the remastered version.
Yeah, actually I do. I haven't really played the remastered version though. Again, I don't play games. Remember, I only emulate them. So but I do own the remastered version.
When I interviewed Brett Mikulewski, I asked him, was it a technical issue? Was it a technical limitation to add mouse support? And he said that at the time, Tim didn't want the game to have any UI. That's why you don't have any verbs. That's why you don't have the cursor. That's why the inventory, you have to flip through things in Manny's suit. Yeah. And so mouse support was something they were capable of adding, but they didn't want to add. Tim didn't want to add it. So,
I wonder if there was also a factor that we were starting to approach doing consoles more, like doing PlayStation and Saturn and Nintendo 64 games more, and the idea that you could do it without a user interface made it much more approachable if you have ever wanted to do a console version, because I think it would move directly. You wouldn't have to do any tricks. The game would work as is on a console pretty easily. In fact, it probably would play quite well on a console with the controls that it has.
Yeah, but then I had to ask Mike Stanley, okay, that was Tim's decision. That was Tim's game design. Why did you choose to leave it as is and not add mouse support for Escape from Monkey Island? And he didn't have an adequate answer for it. Besides, he wants to remaster Escape from Monkey Island as a 2D game using the Scum engine.
That would be pretty interesting. That's not something you can do on the cheap, though.
Yep. So I told him to launch a Kickstarter.
Well, at least you got to play Outlaws and enjoy that, and enjoy Clint's amazing music for Outlaws, which is always one of my favorite all-time game soundtracks. I think he just did a phenomenal job there.
Okay, so, Aaron, what's next?
Well, World Dream 3.0 is coming out eventually, so I finish up all these DOS games and get them working well. Iron out a few crashes as you've seen in the alpha. It's not perfect, but we'll get it there. And then after that, I want to go back and look at some of the Windows games again, and the early Windows games, because I felt like I just started to scratch the surface. I'll probably look at Emperor's Tomb, and I want to get X-Wing versus TIE Fighter working, which I know shouldn't be too hard, since I already have the Windows 95 versions of X-Wing and TIE Fighter working now. And Lucas Learning did a bunch of games. There's a bunch of Episode 1 games around that time, like Racer. And there's also like Rogue Squadron. I kind of want to look at that one too as a port of the GameCube game. Which is ironic. I actually have a connection to Rogue Squadron because they did that for the GameCube, which is a PowerPC based system. And I was asked to help write as an Easter egg emulations of the arcade or Star Wars games. So I can't remember how you activate the Easter egg, but if you ever play Rogue Squadron on a GameCube and activate it properly, you can play the original Star Wars, Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi arcade games from in there. And I was a big PowerPC programmer at the time, so I did a little contract to write those emulations. Since I was very familiar with them from MAME, I wrote my own CPU cores and everything to.
Wait, so speaking of Star Wars, we forgot to play Super Star Wars.
I just told you about that this morning. You're like, I never even realized that this was supported.
Yeah. Okay, so let's play. So this is the Super Star Wars prototype. I
don't know the origin of this. I know that it exists. Like, it's a Super Star Wars is a franchise on consoles, but the fact that there's a DOS version at all was news to me, and apparently was never released. Yeah, there you go.
Luke starts production.
But it even starts up like a console game where you get a little intro, but the startup screen feels very much like a startup screen for a console game.
That's it. Video demonetized.
Do you even get busted for the MIDI versions?
Nah, I don't get busted for the MIDI version. Okay.
So yeah, definitely more of an arcade console kind of feel to this game. I'm not very good at it, and there's a little bit of jitteriness that I need to figure out what's going on. Probably just some timing with the vertical blanking. But yeah, this was another DOS game. I was like, since I'm looking for every DOS game I can find that has Lucasfilm relation to it, I'm definitely looking at this one.
So where did you find this one?
It's out there, there's there if you search for it online, I'm sure you can find it.
Okay.
Actually, I think you can even play it on archive.org. They have the ability to play a lot of the games in your browser now, and so I think this one might be one of the ones that's supported there.
I mean, the reason I want to know the source of this game is maybe that person has one of the previous versions of the dig.
It's your holy grail.
My holy grail. I talked to Anson Jew. Anson Jew worked on all of the previous versions of the dig, and he did great work on these animations. And so it's a shame that there may be a version of the dig out there as these animations.
Yes. Don't let it turn into too much of an obsession, though. I know from working on MAME that people get very excited about the idea of prototypes, and they almost never live up to your expectations of them.
No, I don't expect the game to be perfect, given that it still has a lot of... As far as I understand, the previous versions of the dig didn't have that much plot. They actually worked on scenes very similar to the production of Spider-Man 2. Spider-Man 2, they started filming action scenes before they actually had a plot. Now, Spider-Man 2 it turned out to be a great comic book movie, but that's not how you produce a game or a movie. Don't start filming action scenes and then figure out the plot later.
So yes, that's consider the Super Star Wars a little Easter egg for a future version of Dream.
Okay, so now I want to get the people at GOG and Steam to add Dream as the launcher for several games that they're selling on their platforms. Now, my question is can Dream be standalone when you have it in the install folder?
It's actually designed to work. There's two ways you can do it standalone. One is you can just copy Dream and like any DLLs it needs into the same folder where a game lives. And it should automatically, if you just run Dream from there, it should detect that it's running next to a game and it should just start up right away without the front end. It'll just go right into that game. And so the idea is that you can, if you ever wanted to package it, like if GOG ever wanted to package, any of the games that I support with Dream, they'd be very easy for them to do. They just drop a copy of Dream into there and it should just run. Without any effort on their part to get it to go. And, it won't even let you go back to the front end. It'll just leave you in the game. You can, configure the game from within the UI that's inside the game, but that's all you need. You can also, from a command line, you can run Dream and give it a path to where you've installed a game, and it should just run the game again directly there. And so if you created like a shortcut, like a Windows shortcut that, launch Dream with that command line parameter of the location where the game is, that also would work to just launch you directly into the game. So yeah, I've long thought that it would be kind of cool to use Dream to let you run games, especially since it opens up for platforms like Mac OS and Linux now, the ability to run the games. But, I don't know whether they prefer only open source solutions or if they prefer, more well-established systems, or if everybody's going to take the time to revisit games that are already selling. Like, okay, they're already selling Infernal Machine. It'd be nice if when you bought it, you got a version of Dream for your platform, so you could run it and get the experience, and it will just work. But it's also hasn't been tested nearly as extensively as some of these other platforms like DOSBox and ScumVM, which have many years.
But for example, the reason why I keep giving Infernal Machine as an example is because that particular game uses the Windows compatibility features, so it doesn't have an established launcher. Mm-hmm. Doesn't work on DOSBox because it's a Windows game. Doesn't work on ScumVM because it's not supported in ScumVM. It uses Windows compatibility and works like crap. And whenever you run the game, it asks you for admin privileges for some reason, probably the compatibility features. And a much smoother experience can be established by Dream.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I definitely agree with that. I mean, that's been my goal from day one, is to make it a pretty smooth experience to play the games that you own. So the best I can do right now is just to support them. Support the GOG versions of the game so that when you do buy them, you can ignore what they provide and just run them directly with Dream.
So I think out of all of the games, so for example, games like Dark Forces, for example, it has a remaster coming out next month. Yeah. So maybe they'll not be interested in that. But things like Indiana Jones and his desktop adventures can finally be sold on digital platforms. Or Mortimer can also be sold. Outlaws has the Force engine that's currently being worked on. You know the Force engine?
Oh, yeah.
So the Force engine is the first iteration of something that remasters Dark Forces. So now they're working on Outlaws support.
Yeah.
And I think that DOSBox has multiplayer support as well.
Yeah, I think as I get more Windows games working, that could be more interesting for somebody like GOG. And, there are some limitations that I can't really solve right now, like the multiplayer stuff. I'd need to, and requires more work. And since I'm just one person, there's only so much I can do. And I don't really want to turn it into I think one of the main reasons I don't open source it is that I really just want this to be my own pet project and not really a collaborative effort with other people in terms of like them writing the code. I kind of like the fact that I've done everything soup to nuts myself, and it incorporates a lot of stuff there. And so if I open source it, then I'll get people interested in submitting patches or looking at the code or forking it or doing other things. And honestly, I kind of feel like I feel like I'll open source it when I'm tired with it and don't really want to do active development on it, and somebody else can fork it and take it from there. So I won't say never in terms of putting the code out there. It's not that I'm afraid of putting out the code. It's just that right now, for where I want it to be, I just kind of want to keep it to myself and just do it my own way with, people can suggest what they want or, suggest games that should be added or whatever. And, that may or may not influence me, but ultimately I get to decide what to do with it. I think I worked in a big corporation for many years. I worked on MAME, which is a huge project for many years. And those are all big collaborations. And your decision making is not your own. And so I think I'm just enjoying post those environments, just doing something where I'm in 100% complete control. So that's my goal.
In our first conversation, we talked about your project, The Final Rip, in which you ripped your massive CD collection into FLAC files. Now, the thing is that I went over the entire list of CDs you have, and we have a very similar musical taste. So,
really?
Yeah.
And here I thought I had the most eclectic taste, you know.
So the thing is, you're the only person I know who still listens to Babylon Zoo.
Yeah, I just have the one single from them, but yeah, I do know they exist.
So the thing is, do you know them from the Levi's commercial?
No, I know them from there was, when we moved to San Francisco when I signed up for LucasArts, there was a station there. This is before all the corporations bought out all the stations, and they're just kind of generic now. There's a good station there called Live 105, and at the time they were the alternative music station of the time, and they played Spaceman all the time. And that song got in my head so bad, and so I eventually bought the single, but I was never really that into the rest of their music, so I just kind of stuck with that.
So Spaceman was used extensively in one of the more popular Levi's commercials that came out in. Yeah.
That doesn't surprise me. I probably just don't remember.
But only the chorus, the sped up part.
Oh yeah, that's right. The sped up part at the end.
And you're also the only person I know who actually knows Snicker Pimps.
Oh really? They were huge for a little while. They had a really big breakout hit for the first thing, and they did the one album, and then they lost their lead singer, who was the key to their style. And apparently they produced other albums. I listened to them once, and I'm like, no, it's not quite the same thing. Yeah, it really was just missed. They really needed their singer.
But do you know what happened to their? Wait, you're talking about the lead singer, the woman, or the producer?
The woman.
Okay. So she released an album, a solo album, but it wasn't a trip hop album.
It wasn't?
No.
What was it? Huh.
So when I was looking for something similar to Sneaker Pimps, I found IMX, who's named IMX because of the Becoming X album.
Oh, really?
And IMX is the actual producer who was in charge of that music. So let me blow your mind. IMX has an extensive discography, and once you listen to it, you'll get the same musical style as Sneaker Pimps.
Oh, good. I'll have to go check it out then. Yeah, I looked for things similar to Sneaker Pimps. The trip hop style was kind of getting popular then, and I found a few that were sort of like Way Out West, and what was the other one that I was thinking of?
Attack.
Yeah, or like Ruby. It wasn't quite trip hop, but she was sort of trip hop. There's a couple of bands like that. There's one other one I want to say there was Way Out West. What was the other one that I saw?
And you're also the only person I know who knows She Wants Revenge.
Really? That one I also figured was pretty popular. The funniest thing, though, the only reason I found out about them was because at our church, this is a funny story, because if you know their music, they're not very churchy kind of music, but there was a girl, a teenager, who was wearing a She Wants Revenge t-shirt, and I'd never heard of them before. But that just piqued my curiosity. Like, she was at some church event, and I happened to be there too. And she's wearing, I'm like, what's this band I'd never heard of before? And I went and looked up their music, and I'm like, I probably would like this. And so they kind of, they're a certain style. They're definitely, it was kind of funny. My wife was really into them too at the time, and she was doing a long driving trip, and so with a friend of hers, and so she brought along this music to listen to. And the friend liked the music enough, but they listened to it way too much during that trip, and it's kind of samey after a while. Their sound is, you don't want too much of it in one time. They're great for singles or kind of in a mix or whatever, like that kind of thing. And they have a style, but over and over again, on a long car trip is probably a bit much to stomach, I think, for most people.
So the way I found out about them, it was the fact that Shirley Manson from Garbage appeared in their first video for these things. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I don't know if I've seen any of their videos, except for the one I linked to, because I always have to find an example for each band in my Final Rip page. I have to periodically check it to see if YouTube's taken down the video, but most of the bands have official videos now, so I can also link to official ones.
Okay, so now I'll give you 2 albums for each artist, and you only need to choose between them. Okay.
Oh no.
So Garbage, self-titled or version 2.0?
That's a tough one. Probably the self-titled, just because it's a little more nostalgic for me. Those first few, those open. They have a lot of good songs on that first album.
Okay. Okay, Computer or the bands?
Okay, Computer. But actually, my favorite from Radiohead is...
Wait, don't say it. Either Hail to the Thief or A Moon-Shaped Pool?
No, Kid A. A lot of people don't like Kid A, but there's something about it. I love Kid A. There's my hot take for the day.
Yeah, that is your hot take for the day. From Kid A, I love How to Disappear Completely, and Everything in Its Right Place, but only because of the movie Vanilla Sky.
Everything in Its Right Place is one of my all-time favorite album openers. It's just such a mood.
Okay, another thing. Why don't you have the REM album Up?
Is that one of the later ones?
Yeah, from 1998.
I kind of petered out on REM after New Adventures in Hi-Fi. It was not so much that it's not that I disliked them. It's just that I was sort of finding like each album I was sort of saying, yeah, that was a decent album, but it just didn't really do it for me.
Okay, and Muse?
Muse is hard. I'm also in the minority here because I actually like their recent stuff, and a lot of people think they've really gone downhill. Their old stuff is great, don't get me wrong, but I mean, I like things like Second Law and Drones. I sing along to that stuff. I mean, I'm a singer, and Matt Bellamy's a great singer. To try and sing along to them is like sort of aspirational, but like, some of those songs are just crazy to try and sing along to. But I like them. I think it's because I like the electronic influence in their stuff, and so I don't mind the dropped beats and the Skrillex influence. That's all fine by me.
So it's funny. The reason why most people heard of Muse is because at that point in time, when they started releasing albums, Radiohead stopped sounding like Radiohead. So people turned to Muse as a band that sounded like Radiohead before they went berserk with Kid A. And nowadays, Muse stopped sounding like Radiohead, and Radiohead kind of sounds like Radiohead.
Yeah, I guess. I have to say the last Radiohead album I still haven't really vibed with yet.
Moonshaped Pool.
It just doesn't quite. Again, I'm like, just doesn't quite lock for me for some reason. So I don't know. I've given it several tries. Even pretty recently, I've been trying to say, why doesn't this one work for me? But it just doesn't quite work for me.
So it's an amazing album. You should give it a second or third or fifth try. I'm sure
I'll keep trying. I'm sure at some point I'll vibe with it. Sometimes you just need to listen to stuff over and over again.
Exactly. And one last question from me. What are your plans for 2024? And how can people stay in touch with you and your work?
So, yeah, plans for 2024. I mean, obviously, I'll keep dreaming. That's just sort of my default thing that I do, and I don't have other pressing things. I do plan to keep working on, I do some web development. I have a website that I run called rehearsaltracks.net, which is for choral singers. It's very non-game related, but it does use some gaming technologies because it has a MIDI engine in it that I wrote that runs as a web assembly, so you can kind of live listen to tracks and learn them. So I use that for my music learning, and I keep that up. I have a Patreon for that I actually run to keep that kind of afloat. It's a small thing, it's got 20 people who pay me a few bucks a month to kind of keep the system up and running. So it's a very niche thing, but it's something that I still put some time into and that I enjoy. I hope to get back to postcardware.net. That's a new site I started last year, or not 2 years ago now. So when I was a Mac programmer, did shareware, I released a program called JPEG View, which got hot just by lucky being in the right place at the right time, because NCSA Mosaic had just come out and they didn't display pictures in the browser at the time. You always called an external app to display your pictures. And while I was a free even though it was technically shareware, I was more freeware. I was basically a free image viewing app for the Mac. And so what would happen is they picked me as sort of like, here's one of the image viewers you can use, and it tended to be the one that most people picked because I was free. I didn't nag you about shareware or anything like that. So when you clicked on a picture in the early web on a Mac, you probably launched JPEG View in the background, and JPEG View would display the image for you. So anyway, instead of asking for payment, I asked people to send me postcards if they liked the program. And I got over 6,000 postcards from all over the world, which I never knew what to do with. They've been sitting in plastic bins for years. And then last year, after I left Microsoft, I said, you know what? I'm going to scan all 6,000 postcards and make a database of them. And so I did that, and it was a fun project, and I got them all scanned. And I built all these systems to like help me OCR the back text of them. Not what people wrote, because that was personal, and I don't want to put that out on the web. I mean, I mostly write personal stuff, but I mean, it still has like names and addresses and things like that. But at least the picture part of the postcard, I decided that I could put up a website where you could browse through all the pictures of the postcards that people sent and find out, what the pictures are of, and group them by, country and where they were sent from and when they were sent, and, that kind of thing. And so I have a big database, and I created the database of all the stuff, and I OCR the text on the back so that like you get a description of what's on the postcard in most cases, that kind of thing. And so I put it all up on a website last year 2 years ago called postcardware.net. And you can go there and just browse through postcards. And I started writing tags for all the postcards so you can search on different categories. I've only tagged about half the postcards, and I want to get back and tag the other half so that the whole database is present. Right now, only the first half of the postcards you can access, because I wanted to make sure before I released the postcard to the public that there wasn't any personal information on them, or that if there's nudity, it's flagged, because some of the postcards are rather risque that people sent. I'm amazed that people can send some of that kind of stuff through the mail directly, but hey, it is what it is. So that's one of my goals for this year. I think I'd like to finish up that project and just kind of feel like it's done rather than having it lurking. And who knows what I'll discover? Maybe I'll find some other cool project that I want to work on. One of the best benefits of not working for a big corporation is that when I see something interesting, I generally get to go pursue it. I'm not on a schedule. I don't have to rush or say, well, I can't look at that now because I need to do this other thing first. And so a lot of the things I've done for DREAMM have just been like, oh, here's an interesting rat hole that I want to go dive down, and I should say rabbit hole more than rat hole. Rat hole is more negative. Rabbit hole is more what I want to go down and trace it out and check out this thing. And, eventually it usually produces some new feature for DREAMM, like adding the CRT simulation shaders and stuff like that. That was not something I'd planned to do in the short term. It was more of a long-term project. But then I started talking to John Novak from DOSBox, and he started giving me all the heads up on how he was doing it. And I'm like, okay, this doesn't sound too bad. And I spent, a week basically learning enough OpenGL to redo my video system to run using OpenGL, so I can use the shaders that are OpenGL based and produce the CRT effects. So now it's built into the system and will be part of the new release. So a lot of times my rabbit holes lead to a new feature being added. Maybe it wasn't what I was planning to add right then, but it's interesting, and I just kind of like to let things evolve that way. Another reason why I want to control what I'm doing on the project and not really work with anybody else, because then I have to collaborate and work. Maybe they picked out something that I wanted to work on. Well, now I don't have to worry about that. I can say, yeah, I'm saving that for later because I want to look at this interesting thing. So,
okay, but your highest priority at the moment has to be Indiana Jones and the Emperor's Tomb. I mean, it's obvious.
Not for 3.0 is going to be only new DOS games. I don't want to start down the Windows path, otherwise I'll never put a new release out. So the version after 3.0 will be back to Windows, and I'll probably start looking at that and the Episode 1 games and some of the other interesting things that I've missed.
And of course, people can also follow you on Mastodon, where you post.
Yes, Mastodon is where you can follow me. There's, if you're super into DREAMM and want to check out, some of the latest pre-releases like the alpha that Daniel was playing, there's a Discord that you can get access to as well. I put a link up on Mastodon to that pretty recently, so you can look for that and join us and just kind of chat about the games. It's not super high traffic, which is good. It was for a little while, but it's calmed down now that the initial excitement of having a Discord just passed.
And you also have a Ko-fi page.
That's true. I do have a Ko-fi page. If you want to toss a little money my way for the work that I've been doing for Dream or any of my other projects, that's a way to do it. I've only got a couple of people who have done it so far, so I'm not looking to be a big profit center. But if I had more people looking at the page, then I might post more updates there. Right now, I have kind of gotten away from posting updates on the coffee page. So Mastodon's usually the better place to do it. And if you really want like daily, or maybe not daily, but like more frequent updates, the Discord is really the fastest way to see what I'm up to.
Okay, so I'll link to these links down below in the description.
Okay.
And so it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you again. And I hope that we'll meet a fourth time, and then we'll play a Dream version that, first of all, supports Indiana Jones and the Emperor's Tomb. That's a given. And, various Sierra games or various DOS games or Dune 1.
Believe me, all those thoughts have crossed my mind in the years. And it's really, when you write an emulator, the temptation is to support as many games as possible. But then I feel like you don't really do it that well for each game. Like the games just all kind of run, but you got to do it there. So to do a curated collection means I have to be a little pickier and choosier. And so that's why I haven't done a lot of these things. Right now, I'm happy to keep the focus on Lucasfilm, LucasArts. And whether I expand beyond that in the future, maybe I'll call it Dream, maybe I'll call it something else and focus on a new company or a new set of games, or who knows what I'll do. Or maybe I'll make a generic emulator as an alternative that's based on the same engine.
So for example, on Coffee, there is an option to add commissions. So you can also always add a commission for someone to pay you to add support for a specific game. And then...
See, I'm afraid of that because that's a commitment. And especially with games, a lot of times you don't know until you've looked at the game how hard it is. Like it could be like, I say, oh, you can commission a game for me for, a few $100s or whatever. And I'd be like, great. And I look at it and it's like, half a year's worth of work to get that game running because I didn't look at it ahead of time. Or it could be 2 hours worth of work because it just works, pretty well in the system already. So that'd be a risky proposition. But I've thought about that. But again, even in MAME, we talked about the idea of like, oh, what about, doing a bounty where people would say, oh, I'll pay you to make this game work better or whatever back in the day. And it was always rejected as just being too problematic in a lot of ways for sanity. And you work on these projects for fun, and when you're doing it for money because people have paid you to do a specific thing, that becomes less fun. A casual request like you've made for your games that you suggest, that also lines up with what I want to do. That's great because that's how things happen. But if people make a request and there's money behind it, then the obligation is much higher there, and that makes it less of a fun thing to do and more of a job. And so I'm trying to make this less of a job so that it's still fun.
Okay. Very well. As always, Aaron, it's been an absolute pleasure. And I hope we'll meet again soon. And Happy New Year.
Well, good luck on your next 26 interviews, or however many you do in 2024.
Actually, in 2024, for the time being, it seems that I have a backlog of 6 interviews that I have recorded in 2023 and I need to release them. So in February, I'm going to take a month off and just release the 6. And so it seems that there may be more than 26 this year because for the time being, I'm releasing it weekly and not bi-weekly. So,
well, that's great. I look forward to listening to more of them.
Okay. Thank you, Aaron.
You're welcome.